make up a trade agreement also. Our kingdom will have certain preferences over the free cities. The details can be worked out later. I have no objections to any of this. Egon consented. There is one more thing we desire, King Egon the Crownless. Sara spoke up. Egon briefly looked as if he had been slapped by the title she had given him, and Margaery looked outraged. Oberyn sighed, not surprised by her words. The title had occurred to him before, and many others had probably also thought of it. He hoped it would not stick. What is it? Egon asked, rallying himself admirably. The doctrine of exception. Sara sneered out the title, all of the Starks looking disgusted. Oberyn recalled one of his and his ex-lover's conversations on their people's differences, and grimaced. This was not going to be pleasant. Egon frowned bemusedly. What of it? He inquired. You will get rid of it, Sara declared regally. And proclaim that you Targaryens are as mortal and subject to the wills of the gods as any other. That your ancestors used to have flying lizards to breathe fire at armies to make kings bend the knee to them, does not mean a thing. You have hearts, blood pumps through your veins. The way your house so arrogantly thinks themselves equal to the gods, whether 'tis the gods of the forest, your seven or even the Lord of Light, is the height of arrogance and heresy. We will not ally with people who believe such. You will cease your practice of incest, a sin in all religions, as 'tis clear that the gods do not agree that you are exceptions to their laws. Otherwise, we would not be in this situation, for they would not have punished your house's arrogance by cursing your brother with insanity. You cannot dictate such. It was Margaery who spoke up. Egon himself appeared stunned, speechless by the Crown Princess' words. The Targaryens have ruled for 3 centuries. Margaery was saying hotly. The doctrine has been in place almost as long. The Starks have ruled for 8 millennia, Sara replied curtly and icily. Since long before Valyria itself was first built, let alone the Doom. And yet, despite those many years of ruling, we do not allow ourselves to believe that we are equal to the gods. Such is the height of hubris. This is our offer, you may accept it or refuse it. But anyone who sees themselves as equal to the gods is a heretic, and we shall not ally ourselves with heretics. But you are willing to ally with Andals who follow the 7 scriptures. Tyenn spoke up, raising one of her eyebrows and cocking her head innocently. You care not that you will be helping Andals, so long as we are proper Andals. I confess, Princess, that I am puzzled by your words. Sara was not fooled by his third-born's air of innocence. Our entire belief system is around the fact that there are multiple gods, she explained flatly. We do not stop others from worshipping whichever gods they wish to. But there are limits to our tolerance. For example, the followers of the Red God may not burn sacrifices in these lands. Most importantly, we will not allow the gods of the forest, river and stone to be destroyed. The Andals have long sought to erase all other religions, and that is what we will not accept. Leave our gods be, and we have no concerns. But attack them, seek to destroy them and drive their followers from their homes purely for refusing to give up their faith. We do not accept that. We fight back against that. Tyenn fell quiet, swallowing. He reached out and ran a hand over her back to comfort her. Of all his children, Tyenn was the most religious. He attributed it to her stepmother reading the 7-point star to her as a child, before he had claimed her. Hearing such a harsh analysis of their ancestors' actions would not sit well with her, but he needed her to stay quiet. A warning look towards his other 2 ensured that they too stayed silent despite their sister's distress. I was already planning to end the practice of incest, Egon spoke up, breaking the tense atmosphere. He squeezed Margaery's hand to keep her quiet as he continued. I agree to your terms, they are all beyond reasonable and better than I could have ever hoped for. But he was cut off by Margaery's sudden cry. The young queen consort bent over in her chair, clutching at her stomach and moaning in pain. Everybody surged to their feet and the doors were flung open as the guards came running in, obviously fearing that fighting had broken out. Teorgus fake Nizai, go and get a healer. Sara snapped at them. One of the guards rushed off at her order, whilst the others relaxed at the lack of bloodshed or, in the case of Garland Tyrell, rushed over to the queen's side. She is in labor. This cannot be so, 'tis too soon, 'tis too soon. Margaery wept, shaking her head and crying. Oh gods, help me. Elia stroked her arm, trying to comfort her good daughter. His sister's expression was grim when she glanced at him. "I fear the babe cares not for the timing," Queen Ashura stated grimly. "Pray to the gods of the forest and the seven, for you shall require their aid in this battle, Queen Margaery." "Oh, gods, please," Aegon breathed. His eyes were wide with fear for his wife and he gave Oberyn a desperate look. He and Margaery had been betrothed since Aegon was 5, and they were the closest of friends, though Aegon's personal tastes meant he could not be in love with her. Certainly, he loved her dearly as a friend and partner. Solemnly, Oberyn reached out and placed a hand on his nephew's shoulder as Healer Greenwood came bursting in with several assistants, snapping orders in the old tongue. Margaery and the babe were in the gods' hands now. Chapter 9. The Love of a Father. Winterfell, 8th, March 303 AC. Aegon. Aegon's heart was stuck in his throat as he followed behind the group of healers. Margaery had been laid out on a sort of stretcher, and they were rushing her to a part of the castle specifically set aside for the healers to work on their patients. A hospital, they had called it. A place designed to be reserved for treating and for quarantining the ill, in order to prevent sickness spreading. There was an area there for childbirth, which was where Margaery would birth their babe. He wished that Renly was there with him. Renly was his closest friend, his lover and support. Margaery was his partner in life, a genius at politics and at making the people love them. Renly was the one who kept Aegon centered, kept his head from being inflated by his title and crown. Let him relax and just be Egg, instead of trying to be the perfect crown prince for a little while. Aegon could only pray that his lover was safe, and that the Lannisters had not gone after him. Renly had been away when the attack happened, visiting Storm's End. The Baratheons did not get along with one another, but they were still kin. The news that Lord Robert's wife Catelyn was bearing another child had sent Stannis and Renly on a visit to their ancestral home. The Lady of Storm's End was closer to 50 than 40, and had been having a difficult pregnancy. Though it was more about seeing his nieces and nephews than seeing either of his brothers or good sisters. Of them, most looked down on Renly's free-spirited nature, save for Stannis' wife Lys, who liked to suck up to her younger good brother in the hope of earning Aegon's goodwill through Renly. But he truly adored all of his brother's children, from Robert's eldest Ois to Stannis' sole child, a girl named Shireen. All of them would be in danger. Aegon had taken the utmost care to hide just how close he and Renly were, but he was still known to be his closest friend. A possible hostage to be used to lure Aegon out. But Aegon could not let himself think of Renly right now. It was a hugely disrespectful act towards his wife, whom he also loved dearly and who was currently risking her life to birth his child. Please, he prayed as they hurried through the halls, Margaery moaning and weeping in a way he had never seen her do before. She had always been so composed, even keeping calm and controlled during the coup, despite not being remotely trained for such a situation. Please, gods. Mother, maiden, gods of the forest, river and stone, please have mercy. Spare her, spare them both. If you must take one of us, let it be me. Not my child, whom has yet to breathe air. Not Margaery, who is the loveliest and kindest of queens and ladies, the best of wives. Far better than I deserve to have. Please, please, spare them, please. They arrived at the hospital tower quickly, where more healers and assistants descended upon them. Healer Greenwood barked orders in the old tongue at the other healers as Margaery was carried into a room with a strange chair-like contraption in the center. Aegon faltered at the door. He wanted to go in, to stay at his wife's side as she labored to bring their child into the world. But he had always been taught that childbirth was a woman's area, and the only male involved in it should be a maester if there were any problems. Apprentice healer Rarefrost glared at him. Come, she barked sharply in her accented Andai. Your wife, your child. You be there. Will I not get in your way? He asked anxiously, even as he stepped inside. You must save them. You can save them, can you not? This not worst case we deal with and both survive and are well, she assured him, expression softening a fraction. But you stay. Support Southern Flower Queen. She need you, no other family here. She scared, she need you. He nodded, resolve hardening. He wanted to be there anyway, and Apprentice Frost was right that his wife needed him. He hastened to Margaery's side, taking her limp hand in his own. The healers were hurrying around, setting up blankets, pouring hot water into a basin and grabbing various vials. Margaery lay on the strange chair, and she twisted her head weakly to look at him. "Egg, you're here," she murmured weakly, eyes glazed and face sweaty. He had never seen her in such a state, it frightened him deeply. So many women died of childbed, was he about to lose her? He was not in love with her, but he truly did love her. "I am here," assured her. "I am here, and I'll not leave your side. You are doing wonderfully, Margaery. Our babe will be with us soon. The heir to the Iron Throne, born in the heart of the Winterlands." She smiled feebly. "What will we name him?" Aegon swallowed. "Or her," he reminded her. "It may be a girl." "I promised you a son," she replied softly, eyes half closed. "A strong son to be your heir." "I do not care so long as you are both healthy," he insisted, his throat tight and eyes stinging. She looked so frail, how would she ever manage to push? "I would be the luckiest man alive to have dozen beautiful girls the image of their mother with your strength and spirit." She gave a weak smile. "A dozen sons and daughters," she murmured. "How lovely. I am blessed to be your wife." "No," he disagreed, eyes burning. "I am the one who is blessed to be your husband. Be strong, Margie, please. For the babe, for me, please." "I am trying," she whispered. "But I am so tired. I want my mother." Every woman want her mother at this time. Queen Ashura appeared at their sides, expression gentle and sympathetic as she wiped Margaery's forehead with a damp cloth. "But I fear you have myself and your good mother instead." "Everything will be fine." Aegon's mother had also arrived, grasping Margaery's hand and squeezing it. "Do not fear, Margaery. All will be well. When you is holding your child in your arms, all of this is being worth it," Queen Ashura added confidently. "You will stay." Margaery looked over at Aegon again. Her large brown eyes were frightened and tears swam within them, making them shine. "I will not leave your side," Aegon promised her again. "I swear, Margie. I will not go." Underscore 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 underscore. Oberyn. They were shown to a small sitting room to await news, whilst Egg and Elia went with Margaery into the birthing room. Sir Barristan was also allowed in to guard them, but the healers banned the rest as distractions, much to Garland's dismay. It was right beside them, and even with the thick stone walls separating them, they could hear the Queen's cries of pain. Each time one echoed, the pacing Sir Garland flinched violently and twitched. Oberyn knew how he felt. He had been the same, waiting for Elia to deliver her own babes. Sara and her father had disappeared, presumably gone to attend to the various affairs that came with running a kingdom, actually running it, instead of leaving it to their advisors to rule in their stead as Rhaegar and Aes both had. Sara had been more than a little scornful when he had inquired about the Winterlands Council and her leisure time. "If I have a moment to spare, then I am doing something wrong as princess, and my father would be the same. 'Tis our kingdom, and our responsibility to run it," she had scoffed. "No wonder your realm is so unstable, with kings who would rather bed a dozen different women than rule." Finally, Margaery's screams ended. It seemed as if her labor had lasted for eternity, though Oberyn only had to glance at the sky to see that it had actually been very quick for a first birth. They all rose from their seats as the door opened and Aegon came out with Queen Ashura following him. He was wide-eyed and pale, holding a small white bundle close to his chest with the utmost care. They all rose and hurried over to his side. "I am a father," the young king announced, sounding awestruck. He adjusted the babe, allowing them to see a small red face with a tuft of silver hair. "Allow me to present Crown Prince Daeron Targaryen, heir to the Iron Throne and Prince of Dragonstone. Future King of the Six Kingdoms." "Hail the Prince," Sir Barristan declared, going down on one knee, with the rest of them copying his actions. "What of my sister the Queen?" Garland asked eagerly once they had all risen to their feet once again. "Is she well?" Aegon's jaw tightened. "The healers are with her now," he replied. "As his mother. They said to leave, that they required space to work." Garland paled and swallowed, clenching his hands into fists and tugging on his hair in distress. Oberyn rested a hand on the younger man's shoulder to comfort him. Everyone exchanged grim looks. Childbirth was a war in and of itself, and Margary's past few weeks of pregnancy had been as far from smooth as possible. The earlier a mother went into labor, the more dangerous it was for both herself and the child, and Margary had still been some weeks away from her due date. "Our healers are the best," Queen Ashura spoke up in her musical yet accented voice. "Best in Winterlands, best in Westeros. They do all they can for her. I give my word, as Queen of Winterlands. They do everything they can." Aegon nodded, worry glinting in his eyes before he glanced down at his newborn son, expression softening from worry into adoration and love. "He is amazing," he breathed with the reverence reserved for a loving, new father with his child. Oberyn hoped that he would never have to reveal to his nephew that Rhaegar had neither attended his birth or Raz, nor had he been so awed by them when they were presented. He had simply inquired as to the genders and health of his children, then gone back to his books. There had been almost no concern at all for Elia, bedridden for half a year by Rhaenys' difficult birth and too damaged to have a third babe after eggs, resulting in the marriage to Cersei that had caused such catastrophe for them all. His sister's children resented their father, but Rhaegar had still been their father. They did not need to know the details that proved just how little he had cared for them and their mother. Pow-pos pow-pos pow-pos. There was still no news on Margaery when some servants appeared and escorted Oberyn and his daughters to the rooms that had been prepared for them. Aegon and Garland had refused to go, as had Elia, who had also ended up being sent out by the healers, meaning the rest of the Kingsguard had to stay as well. But Oberyn could see the exhaustion his girls were trying to hide, and knew they would not leave unless he did as well. As such, he kissed Elia's forehead, clapped Egg's shoulder and muttered some encouragement to him, then ensured his girls got to bed so that they could rest. All three of them were grown women now, but he still saw the little girls who followed him like ducklings when he looked at them. It was a simple, but spacious bedroom. The walls were grey stone, with a large fireplace and several torches lit and keeping the place warm. Of course, the whole keep was shockingly warm. Oberyn was curious as to how they managed that, though it made sense that they put effort into such things, just as his people put work into figuring out different ways to keep their own palaces and keep cool. If they did not focus on such things, the Winterlanders would all end up freezing to death. A large double bed piled with furs took up the majority of the center of the room, with more fur rugs covering the floor and a wardrobe against one of the walls. Finally, there was a desk set beneath a narrow glass window. A door opened into a privy with a bathtub, one that was filled with still steaming water when Oberyn arrived. He gratefully took advantage of the bath, relieved to peel his dirty and travel-worn clothes off his body and wash off the grime covering him. He stiffened and reached for his dagger when the door opened as he washed his hair, then relaxed slightly as he spotted his companion in the reflection of the mirror beside him. A moment later, Sarah had joined him in the tub, sitting behind him and cradling his hips with her legs as she took over washing his tangled hair. "I thought you were ignoring me," Oberyn said mildly, closing his eyes and savoring the feel of her calloused, elegant fingers in his hair, undoing the knots with care. If she was angry with him over the end of their relationship, she did not allow it to make her pull at his hair painfully, or to dig her short but sharp nails into his skin. A bit of a shame, that. She had frequently been full of rough passion in bed. It had often been a mixture of a fight and intimacy with her. If it was not, then it was a tender love-making that revealed a gentler side of her that she rarely let be shown. "I am not so childish," Sarah responded. "I simply have more important things to do than pander to the whims of a pampered Southron prince." He smirked at the familiar mockery, then bit back a moan of desire when she began running a washcloth over his back. This was not the time, he knew that, yet her touch aroused him easily. Ah yes, the many trials and tribulations of being heiress to a kingdom. He was not totally teasing her, for he knew how much effort she put into her duties. But he had liked to tease her, try and pierce the icy facade she put up. "I am still the heiress at least, though that is no thanks to you," she replied curtly. He frowned in confusion. "I do not comprehend your meaning, my princess." "You will soon enough," she sighed heavily. "I did not wish to do this, but you have the right to know." She finished washing his back and rose from the tub, stepping outside and barely making the water stir. "Dry yourself," she ordered him briskly as she snatched her tunic dress off the ground where she'd left it. "Then I will show you. I will wait outside for you to finish." Curious, Oberyn was quick to leave the now tepid bath behind, patting himself dry with a sheet and pulling on the clothes left out for him. They were northern clothes, a long tunic made of navy wool and a pair of leather breeches with fur-lined leather boots that laced up to his knees. As promised, Sara was waiting outside his chambers for him. She leaned against the wall opposite the door with her arms crossed beneath her breasts, speaking quietly in the old tongue to a man in the grey uniform worn by the guardsmen of Winterfell. On his arrival, she pressed herself away from the wall, waving him after her as she began striding away without a word. Taking her cue, Oberyn stayed silent as well as he fell into step with her. It was quickly obvious that she was bringing him to the section of the castle reserved for the Starks themselves. At least, he assumed it was the family's rooms, for the wing was heavily protected, and located in a secure point of the grounds. It was near to where the king's solo was, but far enough that personal moments and business ones could be kept separate, whilst still allowing the king to get to his office quickly in the event of an emergency. Guards and servants bowed their heads respectfully to their princess as they passed, casting Oberyn disdainful looks. Unlike those in the Red Keep, they did not pause in their goings about to give obeisance, simply acknowledging Sara's presence quickly as they went about their duties. "My people do not waste our time with pointless courtesies and pretty words," she had scoffed at him once, rolling her eyes at him when he had bowed and kissed her hand. "Winter is coming and we must be ready for it. There is never any time to lose." Sara came to a halt in front of a door with a pair of wolf guards before it. They nodded at her, but kept their eyes fixed on Oberyn, hands resting on their sword hilts. He tried to keep his body language relaxed, not wanting to trigger a diplomatic incident by accidentally provoking a guard. Sara glanced back at him and sighed, squaring her shoulders, then reached out to push open the door. "Come along," she instructed him. "In here." He followed her, understanding finally dawning on him as he took in what was clearly a nursery for a young girl. Though the walls were still the same grey stone as the rest of the keep, they had been covered by colourful hangings to brighten up the room. Like in his own chambers, a large fireplace took up most of the far wall, but it was sealed off by a metal grate to keep the room's little owner from being burned by the roaring flames of the fire. Thick fur rugs covered the floor, and in the center of the chamber a pair of small girls were playing with several dolls under the careful supervision of a woman with a hard face and shaggy brown hair dressed in a thigh-length tunic and breeches like a man. A wicked-looking knife was tucked into her belt, and the callus on her hands along with the scars peeking out from her clothes said that she knew how to use the weapon from experience. Good, it was reassuring to know that his youngest was cared for by someone who was able to protect her. Oberyn focused on his newly discovered daughter. It was easy to tell which one was his, and not just due to the ages. She had the same golden skin as he, with tight Rowena curls, and her hair seemed to be halfway between his raven color and her mother's chestnut locks. She wore a lilac dress with her feet in a pair of woolen stockings, and both she and the other child looked up on their entrance, revealing that his daughter had Sara's grey eyes and Elia's fey-like features. When she smiled at the sight of her mother, she showed off a missing front tooth. She had to be at least 3 years old, and he had not known of her until now. He would never have known of her, had it not been for the coup and his idea of fleeing north. How could Sara have kept this from him? He had spoken to her of how much he loved his daughters, all of them. Why had she not reached out to him? At the least, she should have told him of the girl's existence, even if she did not let him know her personally. "May my, Mama," his child squealed in delight, stumbling to her feet and dashing over to throw her slim form into Sara's welcoming arms. He smiled at the sound of her sweet, bell-like voice, even as his chest ached to know that he had missed her first words and first steps. He had sworn, after discovering Oberyn's existence and realizing he had several children out in the world, that he would never fail as a father again. He had lavished attention on all of his girls, taken care to ensure that he would know should one of his lovers become with child, and that he would be there for every possible moment of his girls' lives. But, due to Sara not informing him of her existence, he had failed his youngest daughter. He still did not even know his youngest's name. "Eminian, my daughter," Sara cooed at her. "Tarduin Anzio Chunpwaladlit. And Fuel sin Cert Gola Elitsa. Someone is here to meet you. Is that all right with you?" She tilted her head the same way her mother did when curious, the gesture utterly adorable as she scrunched her button nose up in exaggerated thought, then gave a nod. "See, Tar sin Cert Gola, yes, that's all right," she consented. "Well, he assumed she was agreeing to something from her nod. Sarah smiled and kissed their child's forehead, shifting the girl onto her hip and turning to the servant, who had stood and collected the other girl, presumably the little Princess Serena. Go rabe Maithe gat, Osha, thank you, Osha, Sarah said to her. Tog Serena 8 ajan I like goya tamail, Maithe si du toili, take Serena somewhere else for a while, please. Osha frowned, but gave a curt nod. Marcha de tu, ban prionza, as you say, princess, she consented, before looking down at the elder of her charges. Tar liam, ban prionza. Is Fidalin nake pala fishi al. Come with me, princess. We can see the horses. See, yes, yes, the princess clapped in delight. Slan Maya, Slan Sarah, Slan Magna. By Maya, by Sarah, by Magna, she waved at them as she was escorted away, but Oberyn barely noticed, too entranced by the sight of his daughter in her mother's arms. Maya. Is that her name then? He asked, voice low and husky. Maya. Maria Sarah corrected him. Serena was too small to pronounce it properly when she was born, and Maya ended up sticking. Her expression was even enough, but she did not quite meet his gaze as she turned to him, Maria still balanced deftly on her hip. If she felt guilty, then he was bitterly pleased about it. She ought to feel bad, for depriving him of the chance to know his own daughter for so long. He swallowed. Maria. You named her for my grandmother, he inquired, as evenly as he could. Maria was watching them with wide eyes, and he wondered if she could understand them. He smiled at her, using the one he kept solely for his children, and utter love filled his heart when she smiled back shyly, her grey eyes lightening. It was the same feeling he felt each time he laid eyes on one of his children for the first time, a feeling of boundless love and joy, mixed with the certainty that he would burn the world to ashes, just to see her smile. Sarah nodded, casting her own eyes to the ground. She confirmed gruffly. And then, there was a Maria Stark as well. King Cregan and Queen Alysanne's youngest daughter. She was a very successful ambassador to the Free Cities, and later she married the Sea Lord of Braavos and helped to repel an invasion before her death at sea. Your grandmother was a good ruler, even if she was a burner, so it seemed like a good way to honor both sides of her heritage. Maria looked between them with wide eyes, expression curious. Does she speak Andai? Oberyn asked, but the answer didn't come from his ex-lover. Yesh. Maria clapped her small hands and smiled proudly. Her words were accented and slurred from the gap in her teeth, and she shone with delight at her ability. I speak Andi. I is being named Maria Snow of House Stark. Who is you being? Oberyn smiled adoringly at her. What a clever little lady, he complimented her, hearing the pride in his own voice. I am Oberyn Martell, of Dorne. I am your father. Maithe, my father, she said, blinking in surprise and reverting to the old tongue. She looked at her mother for confirmation. See, Agra Mocroa, yes, love of my heart, term of endearment in Irish, Sarah confirmed gently. Is he Daethe? Targlian Darcy Oim Puladlit Faudireed. An Rakfe Tuchuij. He is your father. He is delighted to meet you at last. Will you go to him? Maria looked back at him thoughtfully, then reached out to allow him to take her into his arms. A part of him he had not known was missing seemed to slide into place as he settled her onto his hip, stroking a dark curl out of her lovely little face and smiling down at her. I have not had a father before, she informed him, scrunching up her nose. I am glad to be your first, then he replied, feeling his smile widen at her innocence. What do you think, will I do? She studied him intently, her narrowed eyes reminding him of her mother in a sweeter and much more innocent way, then gave a deliberate nod. Yes, you do, she decided. Come, I show my dolls. You like dolls? I love dolls, he answered her seriously as he carried her over to the center of the room where the dolls were scattered and knelt there, setting Maria down next to him, where she promptly sat and reached for her toys. They are the best of games. Sarah took a seat in the rocking chair to watch them, but he ignored her, focusing instead on nodding along as Maria passed him doll after doll, naming each of them and explaining their elaborate backstories. Many would consider him unmanly for it, but when he was with his daughters he loved to do whatever made them happy. He would endure the ridiculousness of having his hair braided with ribbons if it made Lori and Doria smile, and he would kneel on the ground until his knees ached playing with porcelain dolls the size of his index finger in woolen dresses from the free cities if it would convince Maria to accept him fully and love him as her father. He had already missed so much of her life, he would not allow himself to miss a moment more. Chapter 10. Arguments and Agreements. Winterfell, 9th, March 303 AC. Sara. You should have told me it was the first thing Oberyn had said since Maria had gone to sleep and they had left her in her room, Sara guiding him to her own chambers just down the hall in preparation for this exact conversation. Or to be more specific, Maria had abandoned her toys and climbed onto her newly discovered father's lap where she had demanded a story with all the imperiousness that came from being raised as royalty, no matter what kingdom you were born in. The child had been fascinated to hear the tale of Nymaria's flight to and conquest of Dorne instead of any of the Winterlander tales she was familiar with, but had fallen asleep as Oberyn was telling her of how Nymeria and Mors Martell had fought Yorick V. Euronwood and his allies for 9 years before eventually managing to defeat him. Sara had sat in the rocking chair the whole time, watching in silence as they played and chatted and got to know one another. She was not oblivious to Oberyn's pain that he had missed so much of his daughter's life. In Braavos, it had seemed like about half of their conversations had involved her old lover waxing poetic about his daughter's many talents and how utterly flawless all of them were. The second now, youngest of whom had been a toddler at the time. By now Lorza was probably around 7. It was obvious how much he adored his girls, and that adoration had clearly spread to Maria now that he knew of her. Oberyn had carefully carried their small daughter to the bed after she drifted off in his arms, tucking her in and kissing her forehead gently before he and Sara had left, neither of them saying a word until they at last arrived in the bedchamber, when Oberyn finally spoke his mind. Sara herself had been dwelling on how well Maria had taken to him. Although Maria was typically a light sleeper, she had not stirred as her father put her to bed. Already, she trusted him utterly, despite having always been taught to be wary of strangers and following that rule carefully on the rare occasions she met somebody new. The way Maria had taken to her father was amazing, but then again Oberyn had always been good with children. Even back in Braavos, when Sara had refrained from killing him solely due to not wanting to risk a war, she had grudgingly admired his skill with young ones, whether they were high-born children of the bankers or else street urchins who had gasped in awe and delight when he gave them coins. Sara pursed her lips. She hated to feel guilty about anything, but she felt guilty about this. I have a duty to the Winterlands, she said shortly. She still thought her decision had been the right one for her kingdom. But being right for the Winterlands did not mean that it had been right for Oberyn, or Maria. Or even Sara herself. A duty to deny me the right to know of my child. Oberyn scoffed, his dark eyes flashing. His anger had made them turn from a dark chocolate brown to midnight black, as if she were staring right up at a star and cloudless sky during the hour of the wolf. It was entrancing. A duty to keep my kingdom free from the Iron Throne's influence, to shield my gods from being subverted by your own, Sara replied tightly. Bearing her very nearly cost me my inheritance. The kingdom was so outraged I had lain with a burner. I had to retake the trials to prove myself, and spend years working to regain my people's respect. And everyone who knows you knows that the Weirwood throne is all that matters to you, Oberyn sneered at her. For all you scorn the South for our supposed obsession with the Iron Throne, you are as determined to be the most powerful in your kingdom. Sara glared back at him. A part of her could acknowledge and admit that he had cause to be upset with her. But admitting that he had a point would make her feel guilty, and she hated that. It's different, she retorted. I was born to wear the crown, raised from birth for it. I do not desire it for my own gain, but because I wish to better my people's lives. You cannot keep me from her any longer, Oberyn replied, switching the subject to the real focus. I refuse to miss more of her life. Sara gritted her teeth. You cannot have custody of her, she answered curtly. I am not a simple whore, or a corrupt septa, or even a mere noblewoman. Maria is of House Stark, and Starks belong in Winterfell. You would have to get through every fighter in the north, and most of the non-fighters too, in order to take her from me. He glared back at her. I am not saying that I want to take custody of her, he returned coldly. I do, but I am a reasonable man. I know perfectly well that you will not allow it, and your people would kill me, and probably everyone else in my party, if I tried. But I will not miss more of her life. She is my daughter, and I have the right to know her. Sara sighed heavily and glanced away. She wanted to hold down to her anger, but it had already gone down to a weak simmer. She always found it impossible to be angry with him for long, especially when he was right. You are correct, she admitted, having to force the words out. You have the right to know her, and now that Maria knows of you, she will want to know you, and she will be eager to meet her sisters once she knows of them. I will not apologize for keeping her from you. Your nephew seems a sensible enough man, given that he's a Southron burner, but the previous king was not. As you know better than me. It being known that a Stark child had kin in the Red Keep and Sunspear could have endangered my people. She is my heir until I have a legitimate child who goes through the trials. I could not take the risk. But I will not prevent you from knowing her further. I will not agree to her going south, but I will consent to you visiting her and writing to her. Oberyn's gaze bored into her. He was still angry, but he too had cooled slightly after she had agreed to allow him to know their child. Often he began. Ambassadors are sent to represent their countries in allied kingdoms. It seems to me, that if this alliance between the Six Kingdoms and the Winterlands is to succeed, we ought to have ambassadors in each other's courts who stay for a long term, instead of just long enough to negotiate a treaty. As the king's uncle, who has some familiarity with and understanding of your culture, not to mention respect for them, I would be a logical choice for such a position. You would, Sara agreed evenly. Though, are you sure your thin Southron skin will be able to survive the cold of my lands? We do not have your perfumes and salves to keep your skin soft and smelling of spices. He reached out to grab her upper arms and pull her close to his chest. Her breasts were pressed against him, she could feel his heart thumping steadily beneath her palms, laid on his chest for balance as she tilted her head back to meet his gaze properly. Oh, I smell of spices, do I? He whispered down at her, his voice full of dark promise. Her tongue darted out to wet her dry lips and he followed it with his eyes before returning them to her own. Well, I am certain that I can manage, weak Southron that I may be. There are many ways to keep warm, besides sitting by a fire. She had sworn, multiple times to multiple people, that she would not do this again. She was now betrothed to Edarian Holt, a good man and a good friend. He was good to her, and good to Maria. But then again, neither of them expected fidelity from the other in their marriage. Not given Ed's long-term relationship with Arto's rider and her own status as the future queen. She had agreed to permit him to continue his relationship so long as he was discreet, and nobody outside of her parents would ever consider dictating her own actions to her. The important part was that any children she bore had Stark blood, after all. If Oberyn had been a follower of the gods of the forest, stone and rivers, there would never have been a problem with their relationship, whether she wed him or not. It was his faith that caused the problem. Which brought her back to the look in his eyes. He was bending his head to hers, but not quite kissing her. There was a look in his eyes that said that the next move was hers to make. She had promised she wouldn't do this again. Would not risk the influence of the Seven and the South creeping into the kingdom through her lover holding influence over her. But she also knew Oberyn. He would not use her like that. And she would notice if he tried to intervene in her kingdom's affairs. Her advisors would notice, and act. She still shouldn't do this. She went up on tiptoe and crushed her lips against his. This was a bad idea. She was the future queen of the First Men and Lady of the Winterlands, the shield of the realm, the warden of the wall and defier of the others. She was not allowed to make bad decisions. But somehow, when it came to Oberyn Martell, it seemed as if she could never make good ones. He half ripped her dress from her, and she hooked her legs around his hips. She was exhausted, trying to be the perfect heiress all the time. This was a bad idea, but she just couldn't help herself. Underscore 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 underscore. Aegon. She was stirring. Aegon's breath caught in his chest and he leaned forward, feeling his eyes widen and hearing the imploring tone in his voice as he spoke her name. Margie. Can you hear me? His wife groaned and turned her head to him, eyes half open and dazed. Ek, she mumbled. What? Where? The babe. Her eyes widened in realization as she recalled the events leading to her exhaustion, and she struggled to rise from the bed. She was too weak however, and barely managed to lift her head. Egon hastily reached out to push her back down. Daeron is fine, he assured his queen. And you will be well also. 'Twas a difficult birth, but these healers are skilled, thank the gods. And apparently they swear vows in front of heart trees to always do everything in their power to heal their patients as fully as possible no matter what the circumstances, and so they have with you. You will need to rest for some time, but you will recover. I thought I was going to die, Margaery admitted. Her eyes were full of unshed tears and her lip trembled. I was certain that, and all I could think was that I would never see home again. I would die birthing my son in a foreign kingdom that has been our enemy for centuries and is now our best, our only hope. She broke off with a sob, and Egon didn't know what to say. Feeling stricken, he perched on the side of the bed, lying beside her, and pulled her to his chest, stroking her long brunette curls and murmuring soothingly to her. It's all right, he crooned gently. You are well, Daeron is well, everything is going to be fine, I promise. Just rest, all will be well. I want to see him, to hold him, she requested, giving him a hopeful look. All right, Egon agreed easily. He released her and rolled off of the bed. He paused long enough to help her sit up by propping several weighting pillows beneath her back. Then he headed over to the fur-lined cradle covered by a thick woolen blanket to help keep the small infant sleeping within snug and warm, that was tucked into the corner furthest from the window. He shifted the cover out of the way, pausing a moment to again stare in awe at Daeron, who was curled up with his tiny thumb stuck in his mouth, his little eyelashes fluttering delicately as he dreamed whatever it was that babes dreamed of. Taking the greatest of care, as if his son were the most delicate treasure in the world, and to Egon it felt as if he was. Egon reached down and picked him up. Daeron snuffled and squirmed slightly as Egon removed him from the cradle and held him against his chest. Hearing the thump-thump of his father's heart settled the child, and Daeron exhaled softly and turned to snuggle closer to him. Holding Daeron securely, Egon headed back over to the bed where Margaery was waiting eagerly for them. She reached out for their son as soon as Egon was facing her, and he sat down beside her after putting Daeron into her arms. Noticing the difficulty she had holding their son's weight in her weakened state, Egg quickly shoved a few more cushions beneath her arms, taking some of the strain off of her. He is wonderful, Margaery breathed, her voice awed. He has a wonderful future ahead of him, I know it, Egon replied, sure that he had the unmanliest expression of adoration on his face as he looked at the beautiful scene of his wife holding their firstborn. He will surpass both of his namesakes. The young dragon and Daeron the Good will be nothing compared to him. Margaery agreed, looking reverently at their child. Daeron Targaryen, third of his name, king of the Andals and the Rhoynar, lord of the Six Kingdoms, and protector of the realm. The first king born into an era of peace with the Winterlands. His reign will be a golden age, Egon agreed. He leaned over to kiss her gently before pulling away again. I cannot thank you enough, Margaery, for giving him to me, to us. You are the best of wives, of women and queens. Thank you so much for him. I have a good husband to help me be so good at being a wife and queen, she replied with a warm smile. He felt a stab of guilt. Margaery was kind and clever. She deserved a husband who was able to love her completely, not one who loved another. She knew him too well, her expression softening. You cannot help being the way the gods made you, Egg, she murmured to him. My brother Loras is the same as you, remember. I know that you love me, even if 'tis not the love of songs and stories. You have always been a wonderful husband to me. I was truly blessed in my marriage, and I am not speaking of the crown. And even if you were not, I still could not wish for another life. Not now. I mean, look at him, Egon. Look at what we have made together, at what we have brought into the world. Is he not the most magnificent babe you have ever seen? How is it possible to love anybody so much? I don't know, Egon replied, looking at Daeron's little face. The newborn continued to sleep, head resting on his mother's breast. Determination filled his body. Daeron is destined to be king one day, Egon declared. And so it shall be. I promise you, Margie. I will get back the Iron Throne, no matter what it costs us. For him. For his future. I know you will, she replied simply, as if she had never, unlike him, believed otherwise. Chapter 11. The Downfall of the Young Dragon. Sunspear, the 13th of March, 158 AC. Daeron the Young Dragon Targaryen. It was the highlight of his reign so far, Daeron knew. He had succeeded where even his distant grandfather, Aegon the Conqueror himself, had failed. He had conquered Dorne. He had not even needed dragons to do so, and he was but 5 and 10 days, seated on the Iron Throne not even 2 years. Truly, it was a great day for his dynasty. It would only be topped by his next victory, when he forced the arrogant King Cregan to bend the knee as well. Daeron sat regally atop his transportable throne, watching as the Prince of Dorne, Gurren Martell, was led forward by his Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, Sir Gawain Crackclaw, in order to officially yield to Daeron before his most powerful vassals would copy him. All his life, Daeron had dreamed of completing the conquest his ancestor had begun, and now he was half finished. I, Gurren Martell, Prince of Dorne, do hereby pledge my allegiance to the Iron Throne, in the light of the 7 who are one, the defeated prince declared, his dark eyes burning with anger and resentment. He would need to be carefully watched. So it is said, so mote it be. I accept your allegiance, Prince Gurren. Daeron consented regally, waving at the man to allow him to stand. The man's expression was utterly blank as he rose and was guided to the side in order to allow his bannermen to also come forward, one by one, and swear their allegiance to the king. It took the best part of 2 hours for it all to be finished with, and once the last of the Dornish nobles, Sir Santager, had pledged his loyalty, Daeron rose to his feet. This is a great day for Westeros, he declared, spreading his arms wide. For now we are almost one realm at last, instead of half a dozen different kingdoms, constantly warring with one another. I cannot express my delight to know that my ancestors' dream is coming true. However, the unification of Westeros is not yet complete. The Winterlands continue to resist, refusing to see sense and yield to the Iron Throne. As such, we will now turn our attention to the north. Lord Martell, he was no longer a prince, for, as punishment for his house's defiance, Daeron had stripped them of their royal titles. He would allow them to remain as Dorne's foremost house, but none of the Dornish nobles could be trusted to be Lord Paramount of Dorne. He would put one of his allies as their leader instead. My king, the former prince, stepped forward, expression still blank. You will donate a host of men from the Dornish army, who will march to the Winterlands with us to conquer the north. My Lord Commander will also inspect your supplies, and take anything he believes will be needed for us. The Lord of Sunspear's face tightened, but he simply bowed and murmured an agreement. This particular Martell did not live up to his house's words of unbowed, unbent, unbroken. He knew it was a risky strategy, and his soldiers and advisors had all protested the idea. But they needed to move quickly, and their own army was heavily depleted of men and supplies both. They needed the Dornish's resources. Besides, they would have insurance. 14 heirs, including Lady Miriam Martell, will be sent to King's Landing under the guard of my cousin, Prince Aegon. Lord Lionel Tyrell, head of House Tyrell and Lord Paramount of the Reach, will remain behind in Sunspear to rule Dorne as regent for me, until such time as I decide on a more appropriate candidate for the post. Daeron finished. Outrage briefly crossed the expressions of the Dornish, but they did not protest. Daeron could see the fury and hatred flaring in the majority's eyes, however, the rest neutral at best, and he knew that Dorne was not yet secure. They had bent the knee, but only grudgingly. He would need to keep a close eye on them in the future, in case they decided to rebel against him. Underscore 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 underscore. Winterfell, 23rd April 158 AC. Cregan the Old Wolf Stark. Dorne has bent the knee to the young dragon, King Cregan announced to his counselors. They all exchanged grim looks at that. While they were all confident in their kingdom's defenses, it said a great many things that Daeron Targaryen had managed to succeed where the Conqueror had failed, even bereft of the dragons his ancestors had relied on so heavily. The Winterlanders knew better than to dismiss a person on basis of their age. This boy king could be a serious threat, and it was the council's responsibility to decide how to counter it. The Winterlands Council was different to the small council of the south. Instead of 7 positions, there were 10 main members, discounting Cregan himself. First there was the Chancellor, who for as long as Cregan had reigned had been his closest friend Magnus Owen. The man was getting on in age, and no longer fit to fight after a wound sustained fighting a giant some years prior, but his mind was as keen as ever. He was the king's right-hand man, and acted as regent if necessary. The Winterlands equivalent to the hand of the king, Cregan supposed. Then there was the advisor of war, the captain of the Warg warriors, Magnrusra Greyjoy of House Stark, the king's beloved sister. She was accompanied by her niece and apprentice, Princess Aelys. Her job was to oversee the kingdom's defenses, both during war and peacetime. Then there was the High Green Seer, Irina Ryder. She was one of the rare seers who was strong enough to rival a Stark or a Cranogman in the Green Sight, despite not sharing blood from either of them for generations. She was responsible for giving them news as to the gods' wills. Next was the advisor of foreign affairs, Magna Roderick Frost, the younger brother of the current Magna Frost of Wolf's Den. His duty was to manage their trade and relations with other countries. He was a shrewd man, excellent at predicting the movements of their allies and enemies. He had spent some years traveling the south disguised as a merchant and later as ambassador to the Free Cities before being recalled to join the King's Council, and as such had a better understanding of the politics of the South and Free Cities than most Winterlanders did. Seated beside Magna Frost was Magnra Asha Stark, the current admiral of the North's Western Fleet. She was glowering at her counterpart for the Eastern Fleet, and the head of her family's long-term rival, Magna Bernard Seastook. The both of them were constantly at each other's throats, a trait shared by the rest of their families, but they worked well together to ensure the prosperity of the North. It tended to be better for them to work through assistants instead of directly, however. Then there was the Sistir, Treasurer Magna Edric Torrell, heir to his house. He was a young man, closer to Rookon's age than the king's, but that was a good thing really. Cregan's heir would need his own young men when he ascended to the Weirwood throne. House Torrell was a small and relatively insignificant one from the sisters, but the man was a genius with coin. Since his appointment 5 years past, he had managed to triple the royal treasury, a blessing given that winter is coming. Then there was the Chief Justiciar, Magnra Lyson Snowstock. She was a strong woman, unyielding and incorruptible. It was her responsibility to oversee all of the magistrates and sheriffs scattered throughout the kingdom, ensuring that they did their jobs according to the law. She was also in charge of organizing the conclaves, and if it was deemed necessary to have a noble tried, she would be the one to decide if the case required the king's personal attention. Next was the advisor of law, Scholar Olivia Castle of House Harlaw, from the Iron Islands and Suras Kudaunt. She was the current head of the Winter University, and the cleverest woman Cregan had ever met, though her social skills could often leave much to be desired, though her husband was the same, and if he did not care, who was anybody else to complain about it? Her duty was to oversee the scholars, hospitals and schools spread throughout the kingdom, and use her vast array of knowledge to advise Cregan. Then, lastly, there was Cregan's principal secretary, Magnra Ardil Greenwood. A deceptively frail-looking, elderly Krangau woman with an equally deceptive title. Looking at her, nobody not already aware of the truth of her position would suspect the fact that she had run the ISIS, the Winterlands intelligence network that spanned the entire continent of Westeros and the Free Cities since Cregan's uncle had been king. She worked closely with Sura and the Green Seers to ensure the security of their kingdom. They were the bulk of the Winterlands Council, but not all of it. His wife, Linara, and his eldest children, his heir Rookon, and his daughters Sara, Miria and Rhaer all had general advisory positions on the council. His children with Linara were all still too young to join in on such serious matters, the eldest not yet 8 name-a-days. Magnra Greenwood Cregan looked to the woman. What else can you inform us of? As expected, the young dragon is not waiting a moment, she replied, voice hoarse from age. He announced his intention to march north within an hour of the submission of Sunspear, as 'tis being called now. He ordered his men, and the Dornish, to all begin the trek as soon as possible. Foolishly, he has left Lord Tyrell in charge of Dorne, and stripped Prince Garin of his status. The Dornish small folk are furious, and likely they will rebel soon. He has hostages to keep the nobles in line, including Princess Miria, the heiress to the Sun Chair, but that won't stop the commons. Cregan nodded. That was not a surprise. The boy is a foolish child, it seems to me, Rookon commented. He cannot genuinely think that an army, divided and weakened from war as his currently is, could even breach the moat. This is where his strategy differs from most Southrons, Greenwood replied, a hint of grudging respect in her aged voice. He does not, it seems, intend to attack the moat. He will go for the coasts instead, making use of the Royal, Lannisters and Redwyne's fleets, and blocking our trade routes. It's known how much we rely on trade with the free cities to feed our population, and he plans to block any aid sent to us from the islands and the sisters. I see, Cregan murmured, pursing his lips. He had to admit, it was sensible. No other invaders had ever tried such tactics. They always stupidly attacked the moat, no matter many times they were easily repelled. Cregan had expected the young dragon to do the same. Had it not been for his eyesight, he like as not would have ordered the coast's defenses reinforced, leaving them vulnerable to the dragon's attack. Admirals, what say you? This is not the best news, Ashoyles Admiral Seastock admitted, frowning. Our fleet was badly damaged by the Than attack. You recall their attack on the Skane harbor. They managed to destroy 17 ships, and steal another 3. We have only managed to repair 6 so far. The east is under-defended. That being said, Admiral Stark spoke up. The west remains at full strength, if overstretched to compensate for the east's shortages. And our sailors are not the weaklings the south produces. We can fend them off, now that we know they are coming. We will fight them on the beaches, if needs be, his daughter Sura declared stubbornly, her grey eyes filled with defiance. No Southron will ever make the Winterlands bend the knee. Here, the others bellowed in agreement, slapping the table or raising their fists, or however they could express themselves adequately. Cregan smirked and nodded. How like his Ailey her daughters were. Strong and fierce, just as she had shown herself to be. Linnara stroked her swollen stomach, staying silent at his side. She was a good wife, a good queen. He cared for her, and was pleased with her ability to give him heirs to guard the realm from the dragon's greed. But he could admit, to himself if nobody else, that he longed for Ailey still. His determined and headstrong second wife had been lost defending Hardham from an attack when their youngest was 3. Ailey had gone down fighting, as she had lived. He never said so aloud, but his third-born, Ailey's namesake and image, was his favorite child. Looking at her was like looking at Ailey, alive again. Never, so long as the Starks live, will the Winterlands submit, Cregan agreed. Now, sister. Tell us of the army's current state, that we might strategize for the coming invasion. Underscore 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 underscore. The coast near Ramsgate, the 12th of December, 159 AC. Princess Sura Stark. Sura had been in battles before. This was a familiar feeling. She could hear her heart pounding in her ears, the sounds of yelling and weapons clashing all distant, as if they were coming from the other end of a long tunnel. Sunset, her direwolf with a beautiful coat the color of the golden sun as it was replaced by the silver moon, was at her side, of course. The wolf's snout was bright red and dripping crimson drops as they cut their way through the Southron nights. It was so very foolish of them to continuously repeat the same mistakes over and over again, she thought distantly as she yanked her cutlass out of the throat of a Southron man in a green tunic with a golden rose. A Tyrell, if she remembered her lessons on the South's houses correctly. A group of upstart stewards who had climbed to their position by betraying their liege lords. Oathbreakers. She felt no regret at his death. The foolish knights kept hesitating whenever she or another woman went at them. Never mind that they had all quickly proven to be as deadly as any man. The misogynistic burners kept repeating the same mistake. But it was an asset for Sura's side, so she could not find it within herself to be genuinely irritated that they weren't fighting her properly, despite the implied insult to her skills. She briefly caught sight of her betrothed and long-time lover, the wilding Kate of Clan Giantsburn, fighting a man in the red and blue of the Tullys. As expected, Kate was winning easily. Sura spun away from her fallen opponent and looked for her target. She saw him quickly. Idiots, where was the sense in wearing tunics and waving banners to declare the position of your most vital commanders? She herself was dressed the same as the rest of the warriors. All the same, It served its purpose, even if it was Southron stupidity at its finest. Targaryen! She called, making her way to the young dragon, cutting down his guards easily. I am Sara Stark. You die today. His 4 white-cloaked guards formed a barrier between herself and the wingless dragon, but that was easily dealt with. She snapped a command at Sunset, who eagerly followed her orders. The russet-furred wolf growled and leapt on the Kingsguard, her teeth sinking into the firsts with ease. Another of the Kingsguard tried to help, only to lose his own life within moments. To the others' credit, they did not falter, shielding their charge and preparing to fight her. Evidently, these ones were not so willing to allow her gender to deceive them to her skills. Well, good. She was thirsty for a proper fight. Wait, the young dragon called. Sara scowled as she prepared to cut down the first of the guards, ignoring him. What kind of incompetent idiot stopped in the middle of a battle, just on the word of their enemy? Wait, princess. I have an offer for you. The Starks will not submit. Sara snapped, feeling her eyes flash. We have been here 8 millennia, long before you and your statue gods. We will be here when your ashes are no longer even dust, your name lost to history. You dragons will never have our kingdom. Fight me, in one-on-one combat, Daeron suggested, ignoring her words, much to her ire. A fight to the death. Should you win, I will be dead and my army will retreat. Should you lose, your army bends the knee. Sara scoffed. No, she snarled, sounding like the direwolf that she was. But you die today, Targaryen. For the Winterlands. She charged his guards, Sunset running and blocking his escape route. His guards fought well, and bravely. She would give them that much. But they fell, unsurprisingly. The Kingsguard, however vaunted they were in the south, were nothing compared to a fighter trained by the Warg warriors. They died quickly, leaving their king undefended and exposed. He was Aelys Age, with a confident demeanor and a warrior's physique. His silver hair was long, uncovered by a helmet, though he had the sense to wear armor of black and gold plate. It looked like it could protect him, even if it was stupidly heavy and uselessly ostentatious. A crown rested on his brow, one that Sara knew had once belonged to the conqueror. She smirked at the sight of it. She would take it after slaying the Boy King, and it would be stored in the Winter Hall, as proof of the Stark's undefeatable nature. As undefeatable as winter itself. The king raised his sword, jaw taut, and settled into a fighting stance. Sara was tired and hungry, having been fighting for hours. She had some injuries, including a blow to the head. Her enemy was fresh, having been kept away from the bulk of the fighting by his guards. They were both skilled, and experienced in battle. It was a very one-sided contest. If he were not attempting to overthrow her house's rule and steal her father's crown from him, Sara might have felt guilty at what she was doing. Her cutlass clashed against his sword. She noticed with a hint of contempt that his hilt was gold and shaped like a dragon with glinting ruby eyes. Why did Southrons spend so much money and time on ornamentation? Useless, all of it. They fought viciously with one another. Daeron Targaryen was an excellent warrior, Sara would acknowledge it. But Sara was better, and unconstrained by any preconceived notions of one gender being weaker than another. Although he was trying not to let her breasts affect him, he was not putting every possible effort into the fight, as he might have were he fighting Rickon. The thought of Rickon hurt and enraged her, strengthening her determination to win. Her brother, the Crown Prince, a wonderful warrior, her dearest friend and steadfast confidant. Dead because of this child's greed for something that was not his. Now, Rhaea was heiress, and unable to go traveling the world as she had wanted to. Her brother's life, her sister's dreams, both destroyed by the greed of the man before her. Her anger renewed her strength. She increased the power and speed of her strikes, the runes on her blade glowing as the children's magic activated to help her. For Rickon, she cried, and stabbed. His eyes widened as he felt the tip of her weapon touch his unprotected neck, and he choked out blood as she pierced his neck steadily. The crown toppled off his head as his corpse collapsed. She heard screams and yells as the burners spotted their dead king. She ignored everything around her, however, leaning down to snatch up the crown. Rickon, brother, she thought, picturing his solemn visage, the smile he had worn on the births of his 2 daughters, Serena and Sansa. You are avenged. I promise, Your girls will be cared for, as the princesses and treasures that they are. Sura. Kate appeared at her side, spear soaked in blood. Kate Fimir meet. Ainoy. We need to leave. Now. Her words snapped Sura out of her daze. Kilu. Retreat, she called to the remnants of her group. Kilu. Kilu, they agreed, turning to flee into the safety of the nearby trees. It was the correct decision. Should they be pursued, then their knowledge of the territory would be a strong advantage. The enraged Southrons raced after them, and Sura joined the group fighting them, allowing the others to escape with the injured. Rukan was avenged, and the Burners would no doubt decide to flee, now that their king was dead. Word had come shortly before the start of the battle that the host attempting to take their section of the Riverlands had officially surrendered, meaning their control of the upper half of the Riverlands was once again uncontested. The Dornish small folk were in rebellion, and the Green Seers predicted Dornish sovereignty would be restored within the next few moons. Now Daeron was dead. Prince Baelor was incapable of continuing the war or subduing the Dornish. The Winterlands had won again. Sura smirked, and laughed gleefully as sunset ripped the throat out of another knight, one in a tunic she did not recognize. A good day for the Starks. If only her mother were still there to see it. Chapter 12. Kings and Councils. Winterfell, the 9th of March, 303 AC. Ashura. Sara Ashura sighed. The Queen of Winter knew her children well. It only took a glance for her to realize that Sara had broken her promise. What were you thinking? The Crown Princess winced and looked down, as if she were a young girl caught in some mischief with the others of the wolf pack again. She faltered and gave a desperate look to her mother. I was just planning to introduce him to Maria, she claimed. And then we were arguing over my not telling him of her, and then... well... one thing led to another. She looked down again. He is an Andal, my wolf star, Ashura pointed out tiredly. And you are betrothed. I am not an idiot, Mather Sara grumbled. I have never considered wedding him. I know that is foolishness. He means to return and stay here, after putting the crownless on the Iron Throne. To be near Maria. Only Maria? Ashura inquired, raising an eyebrow skeptically. She sighed and tilted her head in consideration. Above all things, she loved her children. There was a certain glint in Sara's eyes that she recognized. The young princess was in love. If there was a compromise, to allow her daughter to be happy and still keep the people content that no Andals would be poisoning the Weirwood throne. It will never be taken well, she murmured. However, if you still wed Edarion, and do not legitimize any children born of your relationship, raising them as first men, likely fostering them to certain houses to assure the people that the Viper did not have an undue effect on them. Perhaps. You have succeeded twice in the trials, after all. Proven yourself against the Whites and in state over the past few years. There is little justification to say you do not deserve the crown. Nobody is flawless, after all. Sara looked at her hopefully. Do you think so, Mather? She asked. She reminded Ashura of when she was a child of 1 and 10 Namadas with grey eyes too big for her fay-like face. Do you really think I could be a good queen, Mama? Her child's voice echoed in her memory. I do, Ashura promised, just as she had the day Sara had gone for her trials the first time. She let thoughts of her daughter and granddaughter steal her resolve. They deserved to be happy. She would do whatever necessary to see her children be happy. She didn't want Sara to become another Benjen the Bitter, lost in regrets and old sorrows to the point that she wasted away. I will see to it, my darling, she promised. Focus on the war, and by the time tea's over, nobody will even consider objecting. But you must wed Edarion. Understood? That is non-negotiable. Sara nodded firmly. I have no intention of doing otherwise. She paused, looking guilty. If this happens, I cannot legitimize Maria, she murmured. And should I have any more babes with Oberyn, then I could not do so for them either. Is that not selfish of me, Mather? Should I not put them first? Ashura sighed and cupped Sara's cheek. Sweetling, she began. You will be the Queen of Winter. It is a heavy burden to bear, the crown. We are not the dragons, letting others rule in our name. We do so ourselves, and that is for the best. It is better for the people, better for our house, but it also means feeling the grief and stress of the darker side of ruling. Sending soldiers off to what you know will be their deaths, making choices for the good of the many, even if it is not good for those you love. The most important thing a ruler needs is someone with whom they can just be them, not the monarch. I am that for your father. Your grandfather's love Aegisthus was it for your grandfather King Ricard. If the Nathirdirk, red snake, all snakes are referred to the same way, is it for you, my love, then so be it. I will not see you be destroyed trying to bear the weight of the crown without an anchor to keep your head above the water. Sarah looked solemn, reminding Ashura of her father as she nodded silently. Thank you, Mather, she murmured. Ashura embraced her and kissed the top of her head. Itgonai, Agra, always, my love, she replied lovingly, in a way she would never consider doing in front of non-family. There was a knock, and old Nan stuck her head around the door. My queen, my princess, she called, her voice cracked from age and body stooped. The council has been summoned, to begin preparations for war with the south. Thank you, Nan, Ashura replied, as she and Sarah stood. Underscore 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 underscore. Eddard. The king surveyed his council. They were all gathered to discuss the preparations for the approaching war. They would begin when the crownless and his people arrived. His chancellor, Lord Mandaly, was a shrewd and clever man beneath his guise of an overweight and jovial fool. A good, trusted friend. The Mandaly were originally a Burner family from the Reach, but they had fled to the north centuries ago, and converted some generations past. They were some of the Stark's most loyal vassals, which said a great deal of them. Then there was his advisor for war, Ashura's brother and the Sword of Morning, Arthur Dane. His good brother was a stern man. He wasn't a warg, but he was the best fighter and tactician that Eddard knew. Beside him, High Green Seer Howland Reed sat atop a specially designed chair to compensate for his short height, expression grave and thoughtful. Howland had been a dear friend for many years, Eddard's most trusted counselor save for his wife. Magna Stark and Magna Seastock were both suffering from black eyes and bruised knuckles, having gotten into yet another fight with one another. Truly, it seemed that even in peacetime, Eddard was busy dealing with the War of the Waterwolves, as Queen Lion, the Dragon Defier's daughter and successor, had dubbed the feud. Still, the pair was more than capable of setting aside their differences to ensure the Winterland's prosperity when necessary. His sister, Magna Torrin Whitewolf, was whispering with Chief Justiciar Titus Blackwood. His advisor for law, Scholar Lewin, was bent over some documents, shuffling them in search of something. Lewin was from the very edge of the border with the south, in fact his father was a Southron. But he himself was a leal man, and Eddard trusted his judgment. Finally, his principal secretary and spymaster, Magna Yon Royce, was also examining some reports from his spy ring. Or, as most who knew of it, which was a select few, mostly the royal family and the members themselves, the Ice Eyes. Though, Eddard had always thought it ironic that it was dubbed after Brandon Ice Eyes instead of its creator, King Cregan. Truly, the old wolf had been one of the greatest winter kings. His idea to plant families as spies in the various parts of the south and the free cities, with members groomed from birth to be moles loyal to the Starks, had been utterly ingenious. Ruthless, but ingenious. They had small folk, merchants and even a few minor nobles who had managed to defy Southron expectations and climb the social ladder to infiltrate the court, all loyal to the Starks and scattered throughout the foreign kingdoms. Then, of course, there were the animal spies. Bird wargs, or rats, cats, even horses. No Southron thought to be wary of what they said around a stray cat. It was an intricate, large web, and all of it was overseen by Magna Royce. Even Eddard himself didn't know the full extent of it, and that was a deliberate choice made to maintain the ring's integrity. Nobody knew more than 3, at most 4 others' identities. Nobody save for Yon himself, and he had sworn a solemn oath before the Heart Tree of Winterfell never to reveal any of his people's identities to anybody outside of House Stark. Ashura sat beside him, waiting quietly. There was a brooding expression in her eyes, one that many would fail to pick up on. He, however, had known her since what felt like forever. They had been wed for 2 decades, and in love even longer. He knew her as well as he knew the back of his hand. Something was troubling her, something unrelated to the situation at hand. He would inquire later, when there was time. Unfortunately, the needs of the realm had to come first, even before his family. Robb and Sara were whispering to one another, Sara patting Typest's back and frowning. The rest of his children were too young to take part, though Arya would no doubt make her opinion on that known later. At last, the crownless dragon arrived, his mother, guard and uncle in tow. Eddard again had to resist the urge to set Leocra on the Natherdyrk when he spotted him. The damned man had seduced Ned's eldest daughter, damaged her standing in their people's eyes. Whilst the King of Winter could grudgingly acknowledge that his daughter was not one to be taken advantage of, the Winterlanders knew where to put the blame in such situations. Sara had been a maid of 7 and 10, on her first trip outside of their borders and inexperienced with the world outside their kingdom. The whole purpose of sending her to Braavos had been for her to gain that needed experience. It was a tradition for their heirs to do so. Oberyn Martell, meanwhile, had been over twice Sara's age and already sired 7 other daughters when they met. He was entirely at fault for the whole affair, in the father's opinion. Eddard should never have given in to Ashura's pleas not to put a bounty on the man's head. For all Sara had promised repeatedly not to let the snake get under her skin again, Ned knew his daughter. She had the same look in her eye for Oberyn Martell as Ashura had always directed towards him. An entirely unacceptable look. And the king could see how the Dornishman glanced briefly at his daughter's chest, making Eddard clench his jaw. He would have to speak with Ashura about this. Hopefully, his intelligent wife would have some solution to the mess. Of course, if all else failed then he could just give the man to the gods. He would prefer to avoid that, though. It was a bad diplomatic strategy, to kill another monarch's uncle right after forming an alliance. Still, they did not actually need the alliance, it would simply be better for them. But they could manage if Eddard had to have the snake killed and it fell apart. "Welcome, Aegon Targaryen." Eddard greeted him with a brisk nod. "Elia Targaryen. Oberyn Martell. Barristan Selmy. I introduce you to my council. My Chancellor, Magna Wiman Mondaly. This my queen's brother, Arthur Dayne, Sword of Morning. He the leader of my army. Then this Howland Reed, High Green Seer. Magna Sybil Starstark, in charge of the Western Fleet, and Magna Brandon Seastook, of the Eastern Fleet. Torrin White Wolf is my sister. Master of Coin I think you say. Then my Chief Justiciar, Magna Blackwood, and Advisor for Law, Scholar Lewin. Then last, my Principal Secretary, Jon Royce. It is an honor to meet you all, the dragon replied courteously, nodding respectfully to them. Eddard wondered where his sense came from. Obviously, it couldn't come from the incestuous side of his family. Yet the Dornish had decided to bend the knee and give up their freedom for naught more than a pretty face so far as the Winterlands could tell. That was hardly the act of a sensible person. Still, in general the Dornish were the most intelligent of the South, though that hardly said much. Perhaps Maron Martell had simply been a bad egg. Time would tell if the Crownless could live up to his initial impressions, but Eddard had to admit it, if only mentally, that he almost liked the boy. If he stayed true to the appearance he had been giving off since arriving, then he could very well be a good king. Now, we begin discussing war preparations, Eddard declared briskly after the Southrons had taken their seats. We will give, for your cause, 7 ships manned by 30 men each, 12 Griffins, and a host of 4,000, under command of my daughter. A reserve force will remain at the border, and replace any losses, to constantly maintain the level, and we will provide provisions for our men and yours if necessary. We also going to facilitate you contacting your supporters. We have list of those for your brother and those for you. It was not much, true. But it was still more than he needed to give them, and he could see the relief in the Burner's eyes at even receiving that much. Jon cleared his throat and showed them the parchment. Dawn for you and Westerlands for Ina, Undwi, of course. Also the Vale is for you. The Riverlands cannot fight for you, because Edmure Tully, his wife and children is being held in King's Landing. Same for Stormlands, as Tywine had the Baratheons taken into custody. They both either be neutral or forced to fight for Lions. Then Reach is for you. Of Crown Lands, most lords are being held hostage also. They likely be made to fight for the Lions. His young counterpart looked discouraged by the news. "What happened with the Baratheons, do you know?" he asked, expression pinched. "He must be close with at least one member of the house," Eddard deduced. Them being taken hostage was clearly personal to him, from the stricken look in his eyes. He did well at hiding his emotions, but he was no Winterlander, and Eddard could read the most minuscule changes in the lad's face. Eddard spoke up. He didn't want the Burners to realize Jon's true role. It was obvious that they had spies in the south, but Eddard would not risk compromising the ring's integrity. "Traitor in the household allowed the Westerman entrance through a secret passage," he informed them. "Robert and Stannis Baratheon dead in the fighting, Lady Baratheon delivered a stillborn. Lord Renly and his eldest nephew injured, but alive. Everyone being kept under strict guard." The dragon's eyes flared at the news of the Baratheons' tragedies. The viper gripped his shoulder tightly, leaning in to mutter something in the boy's ear. Aegon's jaw was clenched, but he gave a curt nod in response to his uncle's words. Eddard decided to move them along. "Worst case scenario, you have about 144,000 men, not counting the ships and Griffins. The Griffins are scouts and archers, not heavy combatants. The enemy can field, at most, 140,000, many of whom would be fighting because their lords are being held hostage, and leaves many castles unprotected. This means you have the advantage. And the Winterland's aid will come as a shock," Sir Barristan added thoughtfully. "They cannot possibly have guessed where you went, Your Grace, and that we formed an alliance would be even less unlikely. I know that Varys could never manage to plant permanent spies here, so the Lannisters cannot know of this. We have the advantage of numbers and surprise." "Yes," Aegon agreed, rubbing at his chin. "But we must not become overconfident, Sir Barristan. You yourself told me that the moment you become convinced that you have won the battle is the moment you lose it. Tell me, King Eddard, of the skills of the troops you are loaning me so generously, and I will better explain the different strengths of my own men." As said Eddard began, silently smirking at Sir Barristan's accidental reveal that the Southrons couldn't keep their spies in his kingdom. He had known it was already, of course, as Jon kept a careful eye on the spider, but it was still good to hear. And he knew that the man had not meant to say such, because all of the Southrons had winced subtly at the words. "Griffin riders are more scouts or archers than heavy combatants," he stated. "However, they are agile and adept at what they do. A Griffin rider is trained to fire up to 4 arrows at once whilst flying. The Griffins are able to fly faster than a horse's gallop, for several hours." The Snake Prince let out a low whistle. He fell silent at Sara's sharp look, and Eddard ignored him, continuing the explanation. He would not give too much details, of course. Their alliance was too new, the memories of their ancient enmity too fresh, for that. But a gesture of goodwill was always a good thing. "The Vice Admiral of the Eastern Fleet, Willis Mandaly, the Chancellor's son, will be in command of the naval detachment," he went on, the Burners listening intently. Underscore 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 underscore. The Red Keep, the 19th of March, 303 AC. Tywin Lannister. Tywin pursed his lips tightly together, resisting the urge to slap his grandson firmly across the face. Why had the Seven punished him like this? He wondered bitterly to himself. What sin had he committed, to deserve a selfish fool for a daughter, a dwarf for a son and a second Mad King for a grandson? Was this to be his legacy, the legacy he had sought to build for years? No, he would figure something out to prevent it. He would not allow House Lannister to be disgraced and reduced to nothing, as it had been during his weak father's reign. He was Hand of the King and Lord Protector of the realm, the most powerful man alive. He would not allow his children and grandchildren's stupidity to hinder him from his goal of securing the power of House Lannister. But Aena most definitely made it difficult. Valina and Alex were spoilt, but not cruel. There was still hope for them, but Tywin had none for Aena. Of course, that meant that he would have to be dealt with, before Tywin's legacy was forever stained. But that had to wait for later. At the moment, Tywin had to focus on the now. "Explain yourself, grandson," he ordered curtly. Aena's expression tightened, but he obeyed. At least Tywine could still keep him reasonably leashed. They were boring me, Ina said, sounding like a spoiled child whining over a broken toy. Talking about things I do not care for. Some land thing, I did not care enough to listen properly. I was bored, and I am king. I can do as I wish. So, I ordered Sumerian to beat them. But they died, because they were so weak. Stupid peasants. Tywine growled, resisting the urge to hit his grandson across the face. It was as if he had traveled back in time to the days of Aerys the Mad. It had been such a relief when Roriger had at last organized the coup to overthrow his insane and sadistic father. Granted, the Silver Prince had hemmed and hawed, using various excuses to put off actually going through with things until Aerys had stupidly triggered another war with the Winterlands. But after that, even Roriger had known and acknowledged that stopping Aerys could no longer be put off. And when he had taken Cersei as his second wife, even though she was princess consort in comparison to Elia Martell's queen consort, Tywine had tasted victory. After all, everybody knew that the fragile-bodied queen was unable to bear more heirs. The crown prince was a healthy lad, but Tywine had known that would not last forever. He had wanted to wait before getting rid of his step-grandson. Cersei had fussed about it, but Tywine was skilled at the game. Had they killed Aegon too soon after the wedding or Ina's birth, they would have been the clear suspects. They had needed to wait, for Cersei to birth a healthy boy and for the child to live long enough to be able to safely divert any suspicions. But Ina's insanity had become evident early on, so Tywine had put it off again, wanting to wait until something could be done to remove his mad grandson. As much as he wanted his blood to sit on the Iron Throne, he was unwilling to suffer beneath yet another mad king. But Cersei, his idiot daughter, had ruined everything. And now Tywine had to clean up the mess. "You will go to your rooms," he ordered his grandson, keeping his voice steely and unyielding. "I will come and see you later, after the council meeting." But Ina began to object. Tywine cut him off with a harsh backhand to the face. The pathetic boy's green eyes filled with tears and sniveled plaintively like an infant. He was weak in body, and even weaker in mind. How did Tywine share blood with him? "You cannot do that," he whined, his voice grating at Tywine's ears. "I am the king. And I am your regent, Lord Protector and Hand," Tywine responded coldly. "Now, do as I ordered and go to your room, or your cheek will not be the only thing hurting." Ina stalked off, grumbling. He was probably going to his mother to complain. Tywine hardly cared at this point, so long as he was out of the way and the Hand could get on with trying to repair the damage his daughter had so stupidly created. He gave instructions to a guard on what to do to deal with his grandson having a pair of farmers beaten to death in the middle of the Great Hall, then stalked from his solar to the small council meeting chamber. The council were already waiting for him. Tywine surveyed them as he sat. Most of the council had needed to be replaced when he arrived at the capital. Some had died in the coup, whilst others had fled. Of the original council that had served King Roriger, only Varys and Pycelle remained. The Grand Maester had abandoned his doddery persona to show his anxiety, and no wonder why. Who would not be anxious, with their half-grown king going around ordering people beaten to death due to boredom? It was only a pair of peasants now, but everybody knew that it would only get worse. His paternal uncle was dead on his orders, his aunt and her family hostages, and that was just for starters. Then there was the Master of Whispers. He had also tossed away his mask of obsequiousness to show nothing, maintaining a completely impenetrable mask. All of the other councillors had been killed in the coup, including Stafford Lannister, Tywine's good brother and the Master of Coin for Roriger. He had died at the hands of the Viper during the Martell faction's flight. Lord Petter Baelish was the new Master of Coin. Tywine did not trust him, but the man was skilled, at the game and with coin too. He had worked for Stafford, and his good brother had nothing but praises for the man's skills. Best of all, Baelish was one of those who looked out for number one, and number one alone. Tywine had learned what he wanted, and gained Littlefinger's loyalty easily, as much as Baelish was loyal to anybody, at least. Once Aegon was found and dealt with, Catelyn Baratheon would become Catelyn Baelish, and her children would all be either killed for the boys, whilst the girls would be married to lords that Tywine could trust. Sansa Baratheon could marry one of his kinsmen, absorbing the Stormlands into House Lannister too. His brother Kevan was the new Master of Laws. It was reassuring to have him there. His brother was the only person save his late wife, his beloved Joanna, that Tywine had ever been able to completely rely on. Jenna was a devoted sibling, but if it came to a choice between House Lannister and her children, she would choose the sons she had borne for Lord Piper. Their other brothers had turned against him, abandoned him. Tywine hated them for that. He hated his father even more, for letting their house become so disgraced that Tywine had needed to go to such lengths to restore things that his brothers had become disgusted by him. Jaime was there as well, as the new Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, much to Tywine's bitterness. His heir was a dwarf because his golden son had chosen to become a celibate knight instead of ruling the Rock as he was meant to. Or rather, a knight unable to wed. Tywine didn't know whom Jaime was bedding, but he was not celibate. That was obvious. Of course, it was rare that Kingsguards were. He almost hoped that his son would sire a bastard whom he could legitimize as his heir instead of Tyrion. Almost. They were short on white cloaks, the old lion mused absently to himself, reminded of that fact by his son's uniform. Ina had declared Selmy, Martell, Went, the Blackfish and Tyrell all to be traitors, and then had raised several men to the position based on his mother's advice. But Sir Strand, Blount and Moore were not remotely Kingsguard material, too slow and unskilled. Cersei had not thought of skill when suggesting them, only of men she knew to be loyal to her. As of now, Jaime was the sole member who would actually be capable of properly defending the royal family, and there were still 3 places open. Tywine would have to ensure that they were taken by men with actual martial skills and something other than air between their ears. Finally, Tywine glanced at the Master of Ships. Montford Valerian's expression was inscrutable as he looked through some pages. The Valerius were a powerful family that had always been fanatically loyal to the Targaryens. Which would they choose when it came to a choice between dragons? The answer was rather obvious, they would choose the true heir. However, with Montford, his pregnant wife and his beloved bastard half-brother Oren Waters all being held in the capital, Tywine could hopefully keep them in line. Perhaps once the man's wife was delivered, Tywine would offer to have the child be fostered in Casterly Rock. That would secure their loyalty well. He would think more on it after the meeting. We shall begin, the Hand decreed after taking his seat. First of all, Lord Varys. Any news in regards to the location of the traitors? He had no legitimate right to label Aegon and his helpers as traitors, but so long as his blood held the Iron Throne, Tywine would declare them as usurpers at the top of his lungs if needs be. Alas, no, my Lord Hand, the Master of Whispers sighed heavily. He looked genuinely frustrated, as if he were exasperated by the continuing lack of news. Tywine couldn't tell if the man was sincerely trying to find Aegon and the others, or if he knew where they were and was helping them by keeping the location secret. Both options were grim. None of my little birds can find a trace of them, I fear. It is almost as if they have disappeared off of the face of the earth. You are the Master of Whispers, Lord Varys, Tywine stated stonily. You were ordered by your king to find the location of the rebels seeking to usurp his throne. Yet months have passed and you have no hint still. Explain yourself. I begin to wonder where your loyalty lies. Varys looked unimpressed, meeting Tywine's gaze unflinchingly. My loyalty lies with the king who sits upon the Iron Throne, my lord. I have no solid knowledge of Aegon and his group's location. Solid. Tywine repeated, latching onto the phrasing straight away. So you have a suspicion then? Varys pursed his lips and inclined his head. I can tell you this, my lord, he stated finally. There is only one place that I have never managed to plant any birds, and that is the Winterlands. Coincidentally, 4 years ago, Prince Oberyn Martell had a short affair with Crown Princess Lysara Stark after they met in Braavos. Silence echoed throughout the chamber as everybody tried to comprehend this shocking revelation and the possible consequences of it. Chapter 13. The Son of Dawn. Sunspear, 23rd, March 303 AC. Doran. Doran let out a heavy sigh as he gazed out over the ledge of the balcony down into the courtyard of Sunspear, missing the water gardens fiercely. Typically, he lived there for the sake of both his mental and physical health. But he knew that at the moment, even in the water gardens, the place would be filled with tension and strain. He found great comfort in looking down at the courtyard of the water gardens, watching as children of all ages and stations laughed and played without regard for birth or the restrictive rules of society. But at the moment, even the youngest children were able to realize that something was terribly wrong, and their normally cheerful attitudes were downcast and their comforting and innocent childish laughter almost non-existent. Since word had come to Dawn of what had happened with the Lions' coup, as it was now being called, everybody had been on edge. Doran had ordered his vassals to raise their banners and organize their levies. Given that his people in the Red Keep all swore that Aegon, Doran's siblings and several others had escaped, Doran had expected to be contacted by his nephew and ordered to raise his banners against the Lannisters. He had sealed off the Prince's Pass and made all of the necessary arrangements for war in anticipation of being contacted by his new king. But it had been 3 moons now, and there was still no word from anybody on the location of King Aegon, or his family. Doran had received a letter from the so-called Queen Regent, his late good brother's concubine, and her son right after the coup, ordering him and his eldest child, his only daughter and heiress, to come to the capital to pledge the allegiance of Dawn to the self-declared King Aena. Implicit but unstated in the summons was the fact that, whilst they might perhaps allow Doran to leave and return to his kingdom, at the very least they would be keeping Arianne as a hostage in the Red Keep. Naturally, he had not even bothered to reply. He had been focusing all of his efforts on finding information of the location of his family, but his investigations had not yielded any fruit. Doran was fearful that they might have been sunk at sea, or that the beliefs of his spies that Aegon, Elia, Oberyn, Queen Margaery and the girls had managed to escape was wrong and they were all dead. Perhaps the Lions had killed them during the takeover and then, to cover it up and avoid accusations of kinslaying that would blacken their already destroyed reputations, faked their escape to try and make the people believe that the royals had abandoned them. If that was so, then Doran would have vengeance. He would see Aena and Cersei and the rest of the thrice-damned Lannisters all dead, and then crown Rhaenys as queen. He knew that his niece was well, because he was in contact with the Vale and the Tyrells, discussing what to do with his allies. But he prayed desperately to the Seven that such measures would not be necessary and that Aegon and the others, especially Elia and Oberyn, would all show up, preferably safe and unharmed, in the free cities somewhere, or one of the kingdoms that were firmly on Aegon's side, and had none of their great house members being held hostage in the Red Keep by the Lions. He heard footsteps approaching, but kept his gaze fixed on the abandoned courtyard, lost in his brooding thoughts. He needed a plan to deal with all that was happening, but he didn't have enough information to make one. There were too many questions that had to be answered before he could settle on the best course of action to proceed with. Were Elia and Oberyn safe? Was Aegon still alive? And what of Margaery and her babe? The child, if it had survived everything that had happened, should have been born by now, or else was on the verge of it. Boy or girl? Healthy. If Aegon could present a healthy son to the world on his reappearance, then it would go a long way towards proving him to be the legitimate king, favored by the gods. It was a sad fact of life that a healthy daughter would not be so significant outside of Dawn. Even a sickly boy would probably be seen as a better prospect for many people. And a dead child, either boy or girl but especially a boy, would be an utter disaster. Especially if Princess Valina conceived a son soon. Doran's people had given word that she and Aena were to wed on the 1st day of April. Doran pitied the girl in all honesty. She was a bit spoilt, but most high-born ladies of her age were. He had heard of some of Aena's activities since he had been declared king. People were comparing him to Maegor the Cruel and the Mad King. Clearly, Rhaegar and his lioness concubine had chosen his name badly. They ought to have named him for his grandfather instead of for the Targaryen who had fathered Daenerys the Dreamer and Daemon the Glorious and fled Valyria 12 years prior to the Doom. It was quite obvious that Aena was Aerys reborn. Even if they were not doppelgangers of one another in appearance, they definitely had the same character, to a terrible degree. If only Rhaegar had pulled his nose out of his books long enough to agree to have his second son packed off somewhere he couldn't threaten anybody, things would have been so much better for them all. Your Highness, a voice cut in, drawing his attention from his thoughts and back to the present. He twisted his head, spying a servant. He took a moment to shake away the cobwebs in his brain and recall the young man's name before responding. Nate, he greeted the man. What can I do for you? Has a letter arrived? Nate, who was more commonly known as Feathers due to having worked with the birds in the Ravenry since he was but a young child, bowed respectfully to the ruling prince. He was a tall young lad, handsome enough and of stony Dornish origin. He had been an on and off lover of Arianne's for several years as well. One of many. Doran loved his daughter dearly, and he genuinely believed that she had great potential as a ruling princess once she had matured some more, but her sexual activities worried him. She had never mothered a child despite all of her liaisons, which rivaled those of his brother in amounts, meaning that either she was incapable of producing a child or else she downing moon tea in the buckets, something that could also end up harming her ability to carry a child in the long term. In addition to that, her lack of restraint had made it difficult for him to find a husband for her, as men suspected that she would cuckold him, and nobody wanted to risk having to raise their wife's bastard born of an affair. Doran did not dare contemplate the possibility of how people would react if she were to have a child whose legitimacy was questioned. Dorne was much laxer attitude-wise towards base-born children than the rest of the kingdoms, but they still would not allow a natural child to sit in the sun chair. Not to mention, it was a fact of life that whilst a man would be able to get away with sleeping around and being a ruler, a woman could not. Men were seen as being within their rights and satisfying a basic need, but women were considered whores. Doran did not like it, but it was the truth. Arianne would not be taken seriously by her peers outside of Dorne if she did not clean up her act soon enough. He blamed himself really. He had spoiled and indulged his daughter, especially after Melorio left, and she had grown up wild and self-entitled as a result. Elia had warned him, but he had not listened, too guilty over the failure of his marriage, and now he was reaping the results. Yes, Your Highness, Nate confirmed in response to Doran's inquiry. He hesitated and then added. It was strange, my prince. The raven that delivered it was bigger than typical for a bird, even a messenger raven that is bred for large deliveries, and it had the oddest red markings on its wings. I have never seen a raven like that before. In addition, it only stayed long enough to drop off the letter before flying off again. It didn't even stay long enough to have some water and nuts to refresh itself and replenish its strength with. Feathers, who was a lover of all types of birds, looked very troubled by that fact. Doran was more interested in the strange description of the bird. Interesting, he mused, as he held out a hand, accepting the letter that Nate passed to him. Thank you, Nate, he stated in a subtle dismissal. The boy picked up on the subtext. My prince, he repeated, giving another bow and twisting on his heel to return to the aviary and tend his beloved birds. Doran waited until the boy was gone before opening the letter. The envelope had been sealed with a generic seal, no emblem. A sprig of hope blossomed in his heart. Dare he believe that his missing kin had at last managed to contact him? He could feel Captain Hotter's gaze, fixed on his back as he read the letter, stunned by what its contents revealed. A small smirk touched on his lips. Only Oberyn would be so audacious and madly reckless enough as to bring the King of the Sev, no, the Six Kingdoms, to the Winterlands of all places in order as to seek shelter and aid from their enemies. Winterfell, the North, the Winterlands. The 10th of March, 303rd year after conquest. To His Highness, the ruling Prince of Dorne, Doran, head of House Nymerus Martell. Greetings and salutations, my dearest elder brother. I beseech your forgiveness for taking so long to write to you and assure you of our safety. Our refers to myself, your sister Elia, our brother, my son Aegon and his wife, who is quite literally just delivered of a miraculously healthy son yesterday. They have named him Daeron, and he is a large, strong boy, the image of his father as a newborn. Thank the gods for our hosts, their intervention saved Margaery and my grandson both. Also with us are our nieces Obera, Nymeria and Tyon, and the Kingsguard knights, Sir Barristan Selmy and his sworn brothers, Sir Garland Tyrell and Oswyl Went. We also have the crew members of Nymeria's spear, who got us safely away from the capital the night of the coup. We are all safe and unharmed, though Margaery is of course very weak and tired from her early labor. Thankfully, it does not appear as though she will suffer any ill effects as a consequence, and she should be able to recover and bear more children in the future, though the healers all insist that Aegon wait a minimum of 6 moons before lying with her again, and even then he must wait longer should they, or whatever healer is in charge of her care at the time, say so. Aegon does not appear bothered by this. He is most concerned for Margaery's welfare. He stayed with her throughout her battle with the birthing bed, and only left to present Prince Daeron to everybody, before promptly returning to her side. Margaery certainly appreciates it. The poor dear is very distressed by everything that has happened, though she is doing a most admirable job of keeping herself together. I confess, I am struggling to maintain my own composure, and not just because of how cold it is here, though the castle is shockingly warm given our location. But I am most proud of my son, who is coping wonderfully with everything that has happened. I pray to the gods that you and the other members of our family in Dawn, as well as my dear daughter Rhaenys in the Vale, are all well and unharmed. I confess, I am greatly worried for you, in spite of the Stark's assurances that you sealed the pass before the Lannisters could move against Dawn as well. Yes, brother, you read correctly, and my words are not written in the midst of fear-induced hysteria or any sort of hallucinations. We are currently enjoying guest right in Winterfell, under the protection of His Grace, Eddard Stark of the Winterlands, 29th of his name, King of the First Men and Lord of the Winterlands, the Shield of the Realm, the Warden of the Wall, Head of House Stark and Defier of the others. It seems, Doran, that Oberyn has been keeping the more intimate details of his trip to Bravo several years ago from us. Whilst there, he encountered Crown Princess Lysara Stark, who was also visiting the Iron Bank on her own family's behalf. Well, you know what our little brother is like. The more unattainable that a woman is, the more he desires her to be in his bed. Still, I never thought that he would so foolish as to bed a princess of an enemy kingdom, and it seems that, as if taking her maidenhead were not enough, he also got a child on the girl. Granted, our youngest niece, her name is Maria Snow, is an adorable and sweet child. Both Oberyn and I learned of her existence yesterday. Oberyn is already wrapped around her little finger. I should be very unsurprised if he were to move himself and our other nieces north to stay by her side. But I must count us all very lucky that King Eddard is such a reasonable man, otherwise we may have sailed to our doom, not our salvation. But, thanks to the grace of the gods, we did in fact come to our salvation. Aegon has formally renounced any claims to the Weirwood throne, and it seems that Cersei and Aena earned the enmity of the Winterlands before we even arrived. They decided to send a letter labeling King Eddard as an usurper and demanding that he come to King's Landing in order as to bend the knee and hand over Princess Lysara and his son, Prince Brandon, to be hostages. I must say, Doran, I have always known that Cersei highly overestimates her intelligence, but really, how utterly idiotic can a person be? Naturally, the Northrends are all furious and indignant at the whole thing, and they have not only agreed to give us shelter but will be aiding us in the coming war against the Lannisters also. King Eddard has promised to loan us 7 ships manned by 30 men each, 12 Griffins, and a host of 4,000 ground troops, under command of his daughter, the Crown Princess. A reserve force will remain at the Riverlands border, and men will be sent to replenish any losses that occur so as to constantly maintain the level of soldiers fighting. They have also agreed that they will provide all needed provisions for their own men, and, if it should become necessary, our own. Finally, they have also loaned us their ravens for contacting supporters so that Aegon can officially declare the Lannisters, Aena and Cersei as traitors and usurpers, and order the great houses to call their banners against them. Given our kingdom's history with one another, it is so much better than we could ever have dared to dream of. We hoped for shelter, but did not dare to request aid in going to war against the Lannisters. They volunteered it themselves. Enclosed is an official letter from Egg, ordering you to rally Dawn's forces for him against the usurper. Copies have been sent to each of the great houses, though we are given to understand that the Lions have neutralized the ability of the Riverlands and the Stormlands to help us by taking hostages. From our predictions, in the worst-case scenario we will have 144,000 men versus 140,000. There is a small possibility of the Lannisters managing to hire sellswords to fight for them, but it is unlikely. They would be hard-pressed to find the money for it. Cersei spent so much of the royal treasury, and according to the Starks, frankly brother, I find the amount of information they have on our realm disturbing. How many spies do they have, and how highly placed are they? They are our allies now. King Eddard and Egg are writing up a treaty of perpetual friendship, but all the same, they are still from another kingdom, and we have been allies not even a Cenite. She and Aena are acting as if their funds are unlimited, in spite of the small council's best efforts to rein them in. And it seems that Casterly Rock's supposedly bottomless mines are not so limitless after all. In fact, they are dry. This is information revealed by Aegon and Oberyn, who learned it through the small council, not from the Starks. But these Northrends are so good at keeping stoic, I cannot tell if they already knew or not. Even if, through some miracle, the Lannisters manage to scrape together enough coin to hire sellswords, their options are limited. The Golden Company would never help the Iron Throne given their history with the Black Fires, and the Company of the Rose is full of Winterlanders, who might have left their kingdom, but still maintain their loyalty to the Starks. Apparently for a lot of Winterlander houses, serving for a certain period of time in the company is a requirement for ascension to lordship, and many inheritance-less Winterlanders join the company, either to see the world, support themselves and their families, or both. That eliminates the two best possibilities for sellswords right there. Furthermore, King Eddard has put out word in the Free Cities that the Winterlands is giving aid to Aegon's cause, and only the truly desperate companies would agree to take up a contract that brings them into battle against the ever-victorious army that has never lost a war in its 8 millennia of existence. You might as well try and dose the sun as defeat the Winterlanders, I sometimes think. I am glad that Aegon has decided to make them friends instead of enemies. Give my love, and that of our brother, to the rest of our family, brother dearest. Oberyn has also added his own letter, also attached along with my son's declaration. All my love. Your sister. Elia Targaryen of House Nymerus Martell, Queen Mother of the Six Kingdoms. Doran lifted his gaze from the letter at last and reached out to pull the bell that summoned a servant, tapping the page lightly on his knee. A small grin was playing on the edges of his lips as he waited for the servant to arrive whilst reading the call to arms and declaration of war that Aegon had sent. A maid, an elderly woman by the name of Deanna who had been a playmate of Doran's as a young lad in the gardens, came quickly and curtsied, inquiring as to his needs. Have my children and niece Sorella all sent to my Solar immediately, Doran instructed her. And then spread the word, I have received word from my sister. King Aegon lives, as does Queen Margaery who is safely delivered of a healthy son, Prince Daeron, and my brother and nieces. The king has declared war on his usurping younger half-brother. It seems that the second dance of the dragons is about to begin. Chapter 14. The Reign of Fanatical Dragon. The Red Keep, the 15th of January, 160 AC. Baelor the Blessed Targaryen. Baelor. Nephew, the doors burst open and Baelor's uncle, Prince Viserys Targaryen, the Hand of the King, came flying in. His face was pale, his expression stricken in manner uncharacteristic of the prince. Baelor rose from where he had been kneeling before the altar at the front of the royal family's private September, turning to frown at the man. Uncle, what is going on? He inquired, keeping his voice soft. We are in a sacred place. To come running into a September yelling at the top of your lungs is practically heresy. The seven who are one. Your Grace. His uncle interrupted him, going down on one knee and bowing his head. Baelor fell quiet, dread welling within his breast. The king is dead. Viserys intoned solemnly, grief over the death of his elder brother's firstborn child leaking through to his otherwise steady voice. Baelor let out a hiss, shaking his head in grief-stricken denial. He and Daeron were too different to have ever been close. Instead, Baelor and Rhaena had always been two peas in a pod, joined together by their love and devotion for the Seven, whilst Dana worshipped the ground that Daeron walked on, following him everywhere he went. But they were still brothers, and this shocking and unexpected announcement pained Baelor deeply. Long live King Baelor, first of his name, head of House Targaryen, king of the Rhoynar, the Andals and the First Men. Viserys went on. Defender of the faith, Lord Protector of the realm and Lord of the Seven Kingdoms. Hail Baelor, King of Westeros. Baelor exhaled heavily, lowering his head and turning back to the statues of the seven to bow before them, specifically to the stranger and the warrior. Oh, great seven who are one, he prayed mentally. You, in the form of the smith, hath crafted this path, and the stranger has come to take the soul of my brave elder brother, who was so blessed by the favor of you in your form of the warrior. Let his soul rest in peace alongside our late parents and ancestors, serving out his justly earned reward within the seven heavens. You have bestowed the fate of kingship on me, so that I might make peace with Dorne, and that I might bring the light of the seven to the heathens of the Winterlands. I shall not fail you, and if I do then may you strike me down and let the stranger drag my soul to the seven hells. I will gladly accept the punishment, should I fail in carrying out your will. He sighed and made the sign of the 7-point star before rising from his kneeling position to turn back to his uncle, who was continuing to wait patiently for him to finish his prayers. Uncle Viserys, Baelor began. You have been hand of the king for my brother all throughout his short reign, and before that you loyally served my father as his own hand for many years. I now ask that you agree to continue in that position serving myself, and aiding me in the task of carrying out the will of the Seven by advising me with all of the wisdom that you have accumulated over the decades. I will gladly serve you to the very best of my abilities, Your Grace Viserys vowed solemnly. Then rise, Prince Viserys Targaryen, hand of the king. Baelor instructed the older dragon. Walk with me to the Solar, and tell me what happened. How did my brother die? Viserys sighed heavily, shoulders slumping. I loved your brother dearly, do not mistake me my young king, he sighed. But he was too ambitious. He tried to take on too much too soon. We needed to secure Dorne. Then, once we had the Dornish properly subdued, we could attack the Winterlands. As it is, he went straight from Dorne to the north, but his plan failed. The Northrends must have been pre-warned that we were coming. I have set Lord Vylorous to discovering how. Lord Vylorous was the current Master of Whispers. He was from Volantis with a Lysan mother, and Viserys had met the man whilst he was still a guest of the Lysan. Vylorous had been visiting his maternal kin around the time that the Rugores were preparing to wed the prince to Lady Lara Rugaria. The pair had become friends and stayed in contact with each other through the years. After being appointed hand of the king for the late King Aegon III, Viserys had convinced his brother to employ the Volanten as his spymaster, as Vylorous had a large network of contacts throughout the free cities and the kingdoms, due to his widespread merchant business. I see, Baelor murmured. An ambush. The Northern navy harried our ships from the moment they reached the Bight, Viserys explained. By the time our navy reached the coast of the Winterlands, their numbers had been cut in half. The Dornish began deserting or turning on our men immediately, further increasing the problems. Not to mention the fact that we severely underestimated the gravity and difficulties of a northern winter. The army's camp was ambushed just after a blizzard, in the middle of the night. They never stood a chance. I see, Baelor stated. He closed his eyes, saying another prayer for the souls of those brave soldiers who had been so brutally slaughtered by the Honorless, tree-worshipping heretics. Do you know whom it was that killed my brother? And what of the Kingsguard? Viserys grimaced, running a hand through his silver hair, which was threaded with grey. The Kingsguard who went with your brother are all dead also, he admitted. Only Sir Skardrick, Lenel and Raymond remain. My son is a prisoner in Dorne, who have killed Lord Tyrell and his men, and Prince Garin has reclaimed his title, for swearing his previous oaths of allegiance to us. As for the person who killed King Daeron, he hesitated before confessing, voice barely loud enough to be a whisper. King Cregan's daughter, Princess Sera. Baelor paused in shock. They were at the end of the hallway that led to the king's solar, but he still stopped and turned to stare at Viserys in disbelief. A woman, he demanded incredulously. A woman killed my brother. The young dragon was killed by a weak-bodied lady. How is it that such a thing could possibly have occurred? Viserys looked around anxiously, nodding with clear reluctance. "'Tis true, your grace," he insisted. "These Winterlands, they are savages. They let their women fight alongside their men. The princess was aided by her direwolf companion. All of the witnesses corroborate the matter." Baelor shook his head in disbelief, stunned speechless. They began to walk again, as Baelor struggled to wrap his head around what he had been told. The heretic's power was strong, that was obvious. What could he do, to defeat the Starks where his predecessors had failed, and bring the light of the Seven to the poor small folk of the north? They were suffering in their ignorance, and Baelor was certain that the Seven had made him king so that they might ensure that he saved the souls of the Winterlanders, and condemned the heretical Starks to the Seven Hells where they rightfully belonged. The question then, was clear. How was he to succeed where his ancestors, even Aegon the Conqueror who had subdued 5 of the 7 kingdoms, and his own elder brother Daeron, who had managed to defeat Dorne, had all failed? It would not be an easy task, but Baelor would do all he could to see it through. Underscore 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 underscore. The Red Keep, the 1st of February, 160 AC. Daena the Defiant Targaryen. Baylor was preparing himself for his walk of penitence when Dana came storming into his rooms without permission. She paused, staring in contemptuous disbelief at her elder brother. What in the gods' names was he doing this time? He was dressed in a robe made of sackcloth, his silver gold hair undone and hanging loosely around his shoulders. His feet were bare, and he was tracing a 7-point star on his forehead using what seemed to be ashes of all things. She was embarrassed even to look at him. Gods, to think that he of all people was the newest king of the 7 kingdoms. Baylor was a failure and a stain on their house. He ought to have become a septon, as he clearly longed to be. It was physically painful for her to know that he was taking Daeron's place, when he had never been worthy to so much as lick the dirt off of their elder brother's boots, let alone sit on the Iron Throne. And worst of all, he was undoing everything the young dragon had made in his too short reign. She would not stand for it. Baylor, she barked at him, clenching her fists and glowering. Yes, sister, he asked with that infuriating serenity of his, turning to look at her. Might I help you? It is bad enough that you shame me by scorning our betrothal, she growled. Bad enough that you desire Rowena, Elena and I to be confined to the keep, unwed and never to become mothers, for the rest of our lives for God knows what insane reason you have in your head. I wish to protect your chastity and innocence, Baylor interrupted her. And as for our betrothal, you know, sister, that wedding brother to sister is against the will of the 7. We are dragons, she snapped back. The doctrine of exception is written within the pages of the 7-point star. But that is not why I am here, my king, she scoffed the title mockingly. And why are you here, Dana? Baylor inquired, still calm. I must be going soon. That. She jabbed her finger at him. That is why I am here. How can you spit on our brother's memory thus? How can you just throw away everything he did and sacrificed to bring Dawn beneath our family's rule? Surely, Baylor, they lied to me when they said that you are going to bring the Dornish hostages back to Sunspear and seek forgiveness of all things from them. You ought to be going at the head of an army, to crush those rebels. Send the heads of the hostages back in boxes, not the people themselves, without a scratch on them. Baylor shook his head, expression steady and calm. They did not lie, he denied. And I shall not go to war against the Dornish. No, I will walk to Dorne, to prove my contrition and regret over the war our brother waged. Then I will seek peace with the prince. Finally, once that is done and I have returned, with our cousin Aemon in tow, I will turn my attention to dealing with the Winterlands. She paused in her fury, looking at him through narrowed eyes. What do you mean by that? She pressed. The Starks must fall, Sister Baylor informed her solemnly. The Winterlands must be brought beneath the dragon banner, and shown the light of the 7, for the good of their souls. This is my task, given to me by the gods themselves. When we have recovered our strength, we will strike at the Winterlands once again, but this time we shall win. Dana softened towards him a fraction. It angered her that he was doing this for the sake of the gods and not to avenge their dear brother's death, but either way the Starks would pay for killing Daeron. Granted, Baylor was nothing compared to Daeron, but there was hope. He had good advisers, at least. She would speak with her uncle whilst Baylor was off on his ridiculous walk of repentance, her uncle who had never dismissed her on account of her sex. Perhaps because of his memories of his late mother Rhaenyra Targaryen, the only woman to sit on the Iron Throne in her own right. Uncle Viserys was clever, shrewd, and knowledgeable about war. Dana was intelligent and had studied the previous wars with the North in depth alongside Daeron as they had grown up together, and she had helped him to plot out their family's future conquests. By working with one another, she and the Lord Hand could come up with a strategy to defeat the Starks and gain vengeance for Daeron's shameful death. She would see Sarah Stark and her pet wolf pay for killing her brother and further humiliating him by stealing his crown. Dana swore it. No matter what she had to do, she would see it happen. Then you ought to go now, my king, she replied sweetly. The sooner you go, the sooner you return so that you might complete your holy quest. He smiled at her, evidently, and stupidly, but what else could she expect from Baylor, believing in her demeanor of fake sweetness, and agreed. They said goodbye, and as soon as he was gone Dana rushed to the library to search out any information she could find about their Northern enemies. underscore 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 underscore. The Red Keep, the 21st of June, 160. Aemon the Dragon Knight Targaryen. Baelor was still weak and struggling to recover from the many snake bites he had received when Aemon brought him back to King's Landing from Dorne. The young Dragon Knight was solemn-faced as he carried his kingly cousin through the hallways and to the king's bedchamber, where he laid the young ruler down and moved away, allowing Grand Maester Munkun and his assistants rush to attend to their monarch. What happened? Viserys asked his son grimly. Aemon felt his shoulders slump with shame and guilt, giving the hand a pained look. I begged him not to, he murmured. I begged him to leave me and keep himself safe, but he refused. He explained what had happened, how he had been put in a cage, suspended above a nest filled with vipers by the Wyls. He told his father how Baelor had bravely, but foolishly, walked through the pit to get to him, receiving gods knew how many bites in the process. I got him to Blackhaven as quick as I could, and they treated him there. Aemon began to wrap up the story. The Maester saved his life, but he refused to remain and heal, insisting that he had to return, so I obeyed and organized a ship to carry us home. We then sailed back here, but the travel weakened him even further. The seven who are one protect his grace, the High Septon declared solemnly. They know of his devotion to the faith, and they will protect him, so that he might use his position to further spread the light of the seven to all corners of the world. It was obvious, at least to Aemon, what the subtext of the man's speech was. He sought to convince Baelor to relaunch the campaign against the Winterlands, to obliterate any traces of the old gods or the drowned god worshipped by the Iron Islanders. Aemon had no doubt that the High Septon would succeed in convincing King to do so, in spite of the fact that they had barely managed to escape the Winterlanders' wrath with a third of Daeron's army still intact after the young dragon's death. They would not manage that feat a second time. Not when King Cregan had lost his heir to Daeron and news had recently come that another of his children, Princess Maria, had died when the ship she was on had sunk off the coast of the Three Sisters, whilst she was sailing past Edge of the Vale's waters. There was no proof that it had been the result of an attack by the Valyman, but it was a strong possibility. If they attacked, the Starks would take it for a certainty, and they would be determined to gain vengeance for their lost prince and princess. If the late princess had been the wife of the current Sea Lord of Braavos, the Braavosi might join the Winterlands in seeking vengeance for her. Viserys was about to reply to the Septon when the door to Baelor's chamber opened and Munkun stuck his head out, looking tired. "My Lord Hand," the Grand Maester called. "His Grace summons yourself and the High Septon to attend him immediately. He is weak, and requires rest, and so you must hasten to speak with him before he falls back asleep again." Viserys gave a curt nod and they all hastened into the chamber. Aemon followed them. Baelor looked better, he was relieved to see. Aemon and the Maester at Blackhaven had done all that they could for him, but the Dragon Knight had feared the worst when Baelor's fever had returned on their journey home. Thank the gods for their mercy, the king's face was no longer flushed with sickness. Perhaps the seven really were protecting him. Uncle Baelor croaked, seeking out Viserys' eyes. "Yes, your grace." Aemon's father inquired gently, coming to his nephew's side. Baelor cleared his throat. "I, King Baelor, first of my name, head of House Targaryen, King of the Rhoynar, the Andals and the First Men, Defender of the Faith, Lord Protector of the Realm and Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, do hereby grant leave to the Faith to revive the Faith Militant. Furthermore, I charge the Faith Militant with this most sacred of tasks." Now, he turned to look at the Septon, whose eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "Your Grace, whatever you desire, the Faith is at your service." The High Septon simpered in a sycophantic manner, bowing to the weak king. "You are to bless the stars and swords with the favor of the gods," Baelor charged him. "And then, you will send them forth to the Winterlands, to defeat the heretical Starks and bring the light of the seven to the poor small folk, who in their ignorance are made to worship the Starks' false tree gods." "It shall be done, my king," the High Septon agreed, a fanatical smile spreading across his face. Aemon cast a dismayed look at his father. Viserys' jaw was clenched, and he moved closer to the king's bedside. "Your Grace," he began, but it was too late. The king had fallen asleep again, and now they had no choice but to go through with his demands. underscore 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 Winterfell, the 1st of July, 160 AC. Cregan XXXV the Old Wolf Stark. Father, allow me to deal with this, Aelys pled, kneeling before her father and king. Let me send the burners a message that they shall never forget, whilst my lady aunt and sister lead the defence of our kingdom. Cregan studied Aelys thoughtfully. News had just arrived that the Winterlands had failed to learn the lesson his people had sought to teach them. Not even a full year after the death of the young dragon, the fanatical dragon was sending his armed priests forth to the border to try and invade, apparently on a holy quest to spread their burner filth. It had been decided by the Winter Council that they would teach another lesson to the Southrons, warn them that there was nowhere on the continent that they would be safe, should they continue to test the wolves' patience. The only question was, who should they send to be the teacher? The king was reluctant to send his third-born into danger, yet all the same he had faith in her skills. He knew that coddling a child was foolishness incarnate, leaving them vulnerable to their enemies. Aelys was long past her first kill, a strong fighter. She was her mother's daughter, and Sara had chosen her as her apprentice and successor for a reason. At long last, the king nodded. So be it, he conceded. Go forth, my daughter, to the capital of the 5 kingdoms. Show the fanatic dragon that the wolves of Winterfell are not to be crossed lightly. I shall not fail, Ashoyle Aelys vowed, kissing his wolf's head talk-style ring before rising and rushing away to prepare after receiving his blessing. Aelys, look after our girl, he prayed to his late second wife. Great gods of the forest, river and stone, protect her for me, please. Later, he would go the godswood to perform another prayer. For now, that was all he could do, for he had things to do. Winter was coming, and the swords and stars were already marching for the river wall, the canal that Cregan had ordered be dug in order to mark the border between the 2 kingdoms. They would never be able to breach it, of course. It was heavily defended, as the most vulnerable point of the kingdom. But Cregan had lost 2 children in only a few moons. Rhaea, with Aelys' eyes and fire, was never again to travel the world as she had dreamed of, as she was now heiress after being the only one of his current living children to pass all of the Weirwood trials. Maria, Aelys' last child, was gone, as was Ricard. That they had reunited with their late mothers in Valhalla was no balm for his grief. He wanted the dragons to pay for their deaths in blood, and he trusted Aelys to see that action through for her siblings. Underscore 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 underscore. The Red Keep, the 22nd of October, 160 AC. Aelys Stark. It was absurdly easy to get into the Red Keep. Aelys had sailed first to Braavos, where she had taken on the guise of a traveling noblewoman from Myr. From there, she and her entourage, made up of loyal Winterlanders who were a part of Magnra Greenwood's spy network and trained to be able to pose as being from a dozen different places, had managed to obtain invitations to the Fanatic's court. The lack of women at the Southron court was a bit of a surprise. She had known that the Fanatic showed his incest-induced lunacy through scorning women and locking his 3 sisters in what they were now calling the Maiden Vault, but she could not even spot a serving maid. Only men. But given the severe lack of ladies available, she was unsurprised that nearly all of the men looked at her with lust and longing, and practically fell over themselves trying to get a chance to speak with her. Gods knew how long it had been since any of them had been with a woman. Almost every man, that is. The king was an exception. Baelor flushed deeply and avoided looking at her. She suppressed the urge to snort when he continuously looked to his burner advisor, the Archsepton or whatever they called the leader of their intolerant band of hypocrites, for instructions on how to deal with her. Had he any knowledge of women at all? He had 3 sisters, and a lady cousin, yet seemed hopelessly lost on how to speak with her. Aelys bided her time, however, waiting patiently for her chance. It came during a feast for the maiden goddess, or was it the maiden part of the god? Aelys could not quite understand it. Were there 7 of them, or one split into 7 aspects? She wasn't even sure if the burners themselves fully understood their own rhetoric, on her third day at the dragon's court. She smiled and leaned in towards the king. "Your Grace," she purred in her faked Mirish accent. "I have heard something that fascinates me. Is it true that you are spreading the true faith to the Winterlands?" She felt ill referring to the burner faith as the true one, but she knew that was how most followers of the Seven considered it so. Baylor looked at her properly for once, his expression alight with passion. "Yes," he promised. "I am. I have revived the faith militant, and as we speak they battle with the heretics in the Riverlands to defeat the tree-worshipping wolves. Then they will burn every last godswood to the ground, and raise septs in their places, and all traces of the false gods will be eradicated." Alis did not even realize she had decided to move until her dinner knife was already buried within the fanatic's neck. His words had pierced her iron control and made her move without planning. He gripped at his throat, choking on his own blood, and the white cloaks all surged towards her. She whipped out her daggers, and her own men, who were seated close to her or else disguised as servants attending the high table, all leapt to their feet, engaging in a fierce battle. But though they were outnumbered by the Southrons, none of them had been drinking and they had been expecting a fight, even if they hadn't known when it would happen, and as such they managed to hold their ground, battling towards their escape route. The great hall's windows overlooked a cliff's edge, and a boat, already prepared to flee, was waiting below for them. Alis fought her way to the windows, whistling sharply. Her direwolf, Alpen, came racing in from where she'd been hiding somewhere with a blood-stained snout. Men yelled in terror at the sight of the giant wolf, and Alis laughed wildly at their fear, her wolf's blood flaring to heights unreachable by giants. "Aban Frionza, princess," one of her men yelled to her. In the chaos of the fight, Alis could not identify the voice. "Kaith Fema Amit. Ainoy. We must leave. Now." She gritted her teeth, but common sense overcame her bloodlust, and she darted the rest of the way to the window along with her men. She shattered it with her dagger, jumping up on the ledge. A whistle of air was her only forewarning, and she just barely managed to knock the sword that would have otherwise gone through her heart out of the way, so it merely grazed her arm. It was the Dragon Knight. She grinned darkly at him as she prepared to jump out of the window, down onto the waiting boat, bobbing on the waves several thousand feet below. "Greetings to the dragons from King Cregan," she called to the Southrons, letting out another wild laugh and jumping down, with Alpen and the remainders of her men swiftly diving after her. Chapter 15. Reunions and the Hope of a Hurting Queen. The Vale, the 2nd of April, 303 AC. Oberyn. Oberyn held on to Sara's waist for dear life, terrified of sliding off of the Griffin's back in spite of the strange saddle and harness contraption that he was strapped into to avoid that exact fate. Humans had not ever been meant to fly, and Oberyn was very much not enjoying the experience. Oh, he'd had the same boyhood fantasies of riding a dragon as any other child as a boy, pretending to be Aegon the Conqueror riding Balerion and running around the water gardens along with his friends. But there was a huge difference between running around safely on the ground where humans were meant to be whilst flapping his arms like a bird, and sitting on a strange saddle with a belt to keep him attached to the Griffin's back, attempting to keep his legs in the right position to avoid hampering the creature's wings in spite of the cramps it gave him as the Griffin soared above even the clouds. He couldn't even see a smudge of green beneath him, not that he had dared to look down again properly after they had passed the tips of the mountains and entered the clouds. Above and around him was the light blue of a summer sky, and thick white clouds were below. He felt more than a little ill with nerves at the position that he was in. Had the gods, be they the Seven or the gods of the forest, river and stone, wanted humans to be capable of flight, they'd have created them with wings. This was not an enjoyable experience at all, and Oberyn was desperate for it to be over with already. Though there were at least 3 more trips such as this ahead of him, something he was dreading and assumed was some sort of divine punishment for his various sins. His nephew apparently did not share his concerns. He was flying with a member of the fighting flock, what the Winterlands called their group of Griffin-riding warriors, a slim young man by the name of Lieutenant Evan Glover, and evidently having the time of his life. Oberyn had nearly had a heart attack the last time that he had turned to check on his nephew when he had seen him with his head thrown back and eyes closed as the air whooshed by and made his long silver locks fly behind him, his arms spread out to the sides as if he were about to embrace somebody. Thankfully, he had obeyed when Oberyn had yelled and gestured at him to stop lest he fall to his death. The boy likely had not been able to hear Oberyn's elaborate swearing, but the prince's gestures had been easy enough for the king to interpret. Oberyn had not been particularly reassured by Sara informing him whither, he thought, but it was so hard to tell with her fondly mocking tone that all Griffin riders were trained to rescue anybody who fell, should the harness the person was wearing ever fail. How often did such things happen? He prayed to whichever gods would listen that it was merely a precaution. The Winterlanders had proved themselves extremely paranoid over the course of their time in the north, after all. Surely it did not happen often. Thankfully, Oberyn's eldest daughter was not as insane as her cousin was. Whenever Oberyn glanced to the left to check on her, he saw Obera wearing a stoic look and holding tightly to the waist of her own companion on the griffin that she was riding, a free folk woman. A woman of the free folk was not a lady, as Ygritte had pointedly told Sir Garlon with a slap, apparently highly insulted by the comparison. Given that Sara had always been incredibly scornful of those useless Southron flowers without a speck of dust, let alone a brain, between their ears, Oberyn was unsurprised by the reaction. He had, in fact, found it rather amusing, called Major Dalla, who was, save for Sara, the highest-ranking Winterlander in their little group. Sara was not a part of the flock, but as Crown Princess, she had received training to a high degree of many different skills. Flying was one of them. Although she had power in her own right, another part of her influence came from the fact that Dalla was the wife of Mance Rayder, chief of the Rayder Free Folk clan, which made her the second in command of the Rayder clan by default. Well, it was currently the Rayder clan, but just because Mance was the current leader, did not mean that their son would inherit the title. Apparently, the Free Folk did not inherit their titles. Instead, they won them in battle or in contests. Rayder had defeated the other contestants in the trial to choose the clan's new leader after the previous one had died, and would hold the chieftainship until such time as he either was defeated by a challenger or died himself. It was an interesting way of doing things, but thinking of some people who were utterly incompetent and yet held positions of power solely due to their birth, the fat flower came to mind immediately. Oberyn admitted that it was in many ways a sensible one. He stiffened when Sara released one of her hands from the reins and began making signs with her hands, communicating with the other two riders. "We are just above the mountains of the moon," Sara called to him, her voice scarcely audible over the whooshing of the wind, even though she was likely yelling at the top of her lungs. "We shall begin getting lower, then fly straight into the Eyrie, landing on its roof most likely. Wherever we can set down." "How long?" he yelled back. "A few hours at most," she replied. "You may wish to rest. You have not slept in over a day." "Sleep," he repeated in disbelief. "In this situation. I wish to live, not fall thousands of feet to my death. Thank you very much, Princess." She didn't respond, but he saw the way her shoulders shook with laughter, and even in the midst of fearing for his life and those of his companions should any of them fall, he could not stop the smile it caused to spread across his face from forming. Gods, he really was pathetic. He was the Red Viper, Prince of Dawn and one of its most, famous and acclaimed warriors. He had 9 daughters, had raised 8 of them himself, had helped run the kingdom for the best part of 20 years as a member of Rhaegar's small council. Yet even the sight of Sara laughing at him made something in his breast swell with pride and delight that he had managed to make her smile, even if it was at his expense. They had lain together several more times since she had revealed Maria's existence to him, and they were sharing a bed. Nobody had said anything to him, though he'd received more than a few exasperated looks from his family and companions, whilst the Winterlanders all seemed like they wanted to geld, mutilate and painfully murder him. But nobody had outright confronted him over the issue, and if Sara had spoken to anybody about it, whatever it was, then she had not told him about it. He wasn't even really sure what they were doing with one another other than being lovers. Anytime he attempted to discuss it with her, she cut him off by coaxing him into more pleasurable activities than sorting out relationships or else simply changed the subject. The rest of the journey passed in relative peace, and Oberyn felt no shame in the fact that he said a mental prayer of thanks to any listening deities that they had survived the journey intact. Whilst Sara's brother Robb organized and led the troops being loaned to them by the Starks to the Riverwall along with Sir Barristan, Nym and Tyon, Sara, Oberyn, Aegon, Obera and Sir Oswyl, who was at the back riding with a young lady named Captain Miriam Greystoke and therefore out of Oberyn's ability to check on without risking slipping off. The man was a knight of the King's Guard anyway, he'd be fine. Besides, Oberyn was far more concerned about his family than his nephew's guard, were all flying to their confirmed allies so that Aegon could speak to them in person and then rendezvous with the Northern host. Although he had sent letters to all of the houses, even those he knew would stay loyal to the Lannisters for whatever reasons, be it power or hostage situations, commanding them to gather their levies, only Doran had been informed of their new alliance, as they would likely need to prove that the king was not a prisoner of the Starks, writing under duress. Oberyn would give credit where credit was due, flight was far, far faster than riding a horse, or even sailing. At most, the entire trip, from the center of the north to the Eyrie in the Vale, to Sunspear in Dorne, and then to Highgarden in the Reach and back to the Riverwall, would likely be less than a full moon, depending on how long they stayed at each place. They had only left Winterfell early yesterday, yet they were now in sight of the Vale. It was astounding. Captain Greystoke had told them that the flight from the Eyrie to Sunspear shouldn't be more than 2 or 3 days, with breaks for the dark hours because flying at night was apparently much too dangerous to risk, even for the most talented rider. It was almost guaranteed to be a death sentence for anyone foolish enough to try. Oberyn was willing to take their word for it, so long as the weather was alright and there were no unanticipated problems. Oberyn wondered if dragons had flown as quickly as griffins did, or if the larger size had made them slower. His thoughts drifted from one topic to another over the course of the flight, until he realized that their surroundings had changed. Now, instead of being surrounded by blue and white with the only breaks in color coming from glimpses of his companions, he could see mountains, and the ground, when he risked a brief look down at it, was covered with green grass instead of white clouds. The Eyrie was right in front of them, and they flew in, right over the heads of the guards, who were much too shocked to think of raising their bows. Lord Elbereth and Artis came running out with a dozen guards just as they landed, skidding to a stop when they laid eyes on Aegon. "Your Grace!" Lord Elbereth cried. "Thank the gods! We had feared the worst, even after receiving the letter. But this, what are you doing with them?" He pointed an accusing finger at the Northrons, who had gathered together beside their mounts. All of them were tense and stoic, with their hands near to, but not on, the hilts of their weapons. Oberyn suppressed the urge to grimace. Lord Elbereth had lost his cousin Denys, his uncle Jon and several friends in the most recent war against the Winterlands. Due to the Vale's proximity to the Three Sisters and the Mountain Clan's alliance with the Starks, his people often got into clashes with them. Only the Riverlands and the Western Fleet got into more skirmishes, the Riverlanders with their Northern counterparts at the Riverwall and the West with the Ironborn. This could be a very tense meeting. Egg, a woman's scream interrupted the king's attempt at responding. "Uncle Oberyn! Oberyn! Aegon!" she was echoed by a man's voice. Both were familiar, and Oberyn felt some of his tension drain as his niece and uncle came sprinting out of the castle doors. He had hoped they were safe, had been assured that it was so by the Winterlanders, whose spy network knew a discomforting amount about the movements of the south, but he had still been afraid for them both. "Rah!" Aegon cried, equally relieved. He opened his arms just in time for his elder sister to throw herself into his embrace, the princess and future Lady Paramount of the Vale weeping freely. "I feared the worst," she sobbed. "Thank the gods that you are safe. Where is mother? How are Margaery and the babe? Our other cousins? We have been without word for moons, save for a single letter ordering my good father to call the banners. You must tell us all." Indeed, Uncle Luwin agreed, his own relief clear as he took them in, clapping a hand on Oswyl, his former squire's shoulder. "It appears you have a long tale to tell us, and a very interesting one at that." "Yes, you speak truly," Nuncle Aegon confirmed, glancing at the silent and aloof-looking Northrons. "But first, Lord Arryn, he turned to the man, who was torn between relief at the evidence of his liege's safety and blatant suspicion at the presence of the Winterlanders. "Might we partake of guest right? I vow by the old gods and the new, these people are our allies. Without them, myself, my wife and son would all be dead, not to mention my lady mother, my lord uncle, my cousins and our guards." Looking as if he would prefer to throw himself out of the moon doors, Lord Elbereth reluctantly gave in to the king's request, gesturing for some servants to bring forth the bread and salt. Oberyn saw the Northrons relax the minute the bread touched their tongues, their hands abandoning their positions beside their weapons and the foursome stepping slightly away from their mounts, now that their safety was assured. Let us adjourn to Mysola, my king Lord Arin suggested once they had all received the guest rite. I confess, I am eager to hear this story myself. And, as I failed to say so properly before, please allow me to express the Vale's relief at your survival. And you spoke of a son. What auspicious news, to hear that the realm has an heir. I trust that he and the queen are well. I thank you, my lord Egon answered. Yes, thanks to the mercy of the gods, my wife and son, whom we have named Daeron, are both very well, thank the gods. Let us go to your solar, and I will reveal all. Underscore 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 underscore. Winterfell, the 4th of April, 303 AC. Elia. Elia smiled softly as she kissed Margaery's cheek before leaving her daughter in privacy so that the younger woman could nurse her son. Originally, Margaery had planned to have a wet nurse attend to her babe's needs, instead of doing so herself. Elia herself had nursed both Rhaenys and Aegon, but she knew that was unusual for a highborn lady, especially a queen. And even she had never changed one of her children, or winded them. The thought of doing so had never even occurred to her, something that now made her feel guilty as she observed the actions of the Northern mothers scattered around. Lady Olenna had sneered at her when she had inquired as to how Margaery intended to have the babe fed early on into her daughter's pregnancy, contemptuous of the idea of her granddaughter spending time caring for her child when she could be performing her duties as a queen. Spreading Tyrell influence on her family's behalf. Olenna had proudly stated that she had been a very traditional mother, leaving the care of her son and daughters to wet nurses, septars and tutors when they were older. Elia had bitten back a remark about how well her neglecting her children's care in favor of spreading her influence had worked out. Mace Tyrell was a bumbling fool under his mother's thumb whom everyone made a mockery of. Janna Fossoe was an empty-headed fool whose greatest joy in life was gossiping about clothes, not even people. Just clothes and fashion. Mina Redwine was the only one of the trio that had any brain at all, and she was too busy trying to keep her imbecilic husband and gambling sons from sending her marital house spiraling into debt to do anything noteworthy. But though Margaery had at first planned to follow her grandmother's lead, though she had confessed to Elia and her mother Aeleri that she had always planned to spend more time with her children than Olenna had ever done, and to be very involved in their education also, their circumstances had prevented that. The looks the young queen had received from the Northrons when she had asked about a wet nurse had made even the ever-composed Margaery Targaryen of House Tyrell flush a deep red. Apparently, in the Winterlands, the only times that a mother did not feed her babe herself was when she was a. ill or dead and thus incapable of it, or b. if her milk had dried up early or had never come. They believed that nursing was the most important part of developing a mother-child bond, and that, should another do so in their place, it would disrupt the creation of that sacred bond. They also claimed it was worse for the child's health, as the mother's milk was made specifically by the gods for that child, and using milk for another babe would increase the chances of the babe's health being damaged or weak. The thought of somebody willingly refusing to feed their own babe was shocking and awful to them. In addition, all mothers, be they high or low-born, were expected to care for their infant's basic needs themselves, again to aid the mother-child bond. Margaery had not brought it up again after that, simply asking to be shown the proper way to do such instead. Elia thought she was actually happy about it, because there was a certain sparkle in her eye when she announced that she needed to feed her child that said so. Though she was not so positive about changing the child. Elia had done so in Marge's place a few times, and it was one thing she was pleased queens were not expected to do in the south. Who knew that such a tiny form could produce so much waste? But Margaery preferred to care for her son's needs in private for the sake of her modesty, and so she was typically left alone when she was feeding her child. Elia left the chambers and began making her way back to the nursery, hoping to be allowed to see her niece. She was allowed around Maria, who was a lovely child, but had to be supervised. That stung, but she had already learned that it was not due to fears of her physically harming the child. What concerned them was that she would start telling the girl about the Seven and converting her. Elia was willing to put her, admittedly not very strong. None of her mother's children were very religious, in fact, religious opinions to the side in exchange for getting to spend time with her Northern niece. The snow snake, as Oberyn had taken to calling his youngest daughter affectionately, was a bright and sweet child, and spending time with her distracted Elia from her worries over her family. She was lost in thought as she wandered in the direction of the royal wing where the Starks lived, wondering how long it would take Egg and Oberyn to reach the Eyrie. As such, she failed to notice Arthur Dayne rounding the corner until they knocked into one another. "Apologies, Mother Queen," he grunted, grabbing her arms to prevent her from falling. Realizing what he had called her, he quickly corrected himself. "Apologies, Queen Mother." She smiled and waved it off, hoping her cheeks had not turned pink. It seemed that a taste for Northrons ran in the Martell line, because her younger brother was not the only one of their group who had developed an attraction to a Winterlander. She had been surprised that Paladin Dayne, in spite of being leader of the Winterlander army, had not gone with his apprentice to help run it. However, Queen Ashura had told them that it was very important for Robb to gain respect and recognition in battle as Arthur's future replacement, and the same for Crown Princess Lysara. Were Arthur to go with them, it would cast doubts on whether it had been him or them who was really running the show. It made sense, and Elia had found herself spending time with the man. He was a charming man, and she liked him very much. Arthur Dayne was the Sword of Morning, a title passed down through his family to the most worthy and greatest warriors born to the house. There was magic involved somehow, though Elia had not been given any details. Those were all kept close to the chest of Hojo Dayne. The Queen of the Winterlands had, however, been gracious enough to explain the same outline that everyone else knew about it. The sword, Dawn, would allow anybody of Dayne blood to touch it, but to wield it required a certain type of character. Without that character, the sword would be too heavy to lift, let alone wield. There could be centuries without a Sword of Morning. Queen Ashura, who had become a friend to both Elia and Margie, had informed them that the longest period recorded without a Dayne being worthy of Dawn was 253 years, or it could pass from one generation to the next. It all depended on the people available and what they were like. There were also cases recorded of a sword losing his ability to wield Dawn after turning corrupt. It was always a sure sign that something was wrong with the warrior if they lost the ability to use Dawn. Dayne was not just the Sword of Morning, but head of the Order of the Paladins. From what Elia had gathered, King Euron IX Stark had formed the order in response to the Knights of the Andals. They were, in essence, the Winterlands version of knights. However, they took their vows in Godswoods instead of insects, and all wore the same uniform of a navy tunic and black breeches, with a symbol called a triquetra sewn on their left breast, just above their hearts. The symbol apparently represented the three stages of life: birth, adulthood and death, and was very important for the First Men. Unlike with the Knights of the South, you did not need to be highborn to attain the rank. But you did have to have seen combat, real combat, not just mock battle like in a tourney, and you could not bribe your way to the rank if you did not have the necessary skills to reach it. At least in theory. Ashura had acknowledged that their systems were not flawless, just as close to it as they could manage. They had many checks and balances, she called it. Paladin Dayne had silver hair and purple eyes, similar to Rhaegar, but his was more natural, with the silver closer to gold than white like the Targaryens and hints of dark blue in his purple gaze. She preferred it in all honesty. Rhaegar's silver locks and violet eyes had been almost ethereal, making him look almost inhuman, as if he really were a living god the way the doctrine of exception was sometimes interpreted. They had unnerved Elia a great deal up for the first part of her marriage, until she had managed to get used to them. The color of Arthur's eyes was softer, for lack of a better description. His skin was tanned from many hours spent outside training or fighting, his hands calloused and his muscles strong and sure. Another contrast to Rhaegar, who had been constantly pale with soft hands due to the amount of time he spent studying in the library. Most different of all, Elia felt like a woman when Arthur Dayne looked at her, instead of just Rhaegar's sickly and scorned first wife, and an attractive woman at that. It was a feeling that she was beginning to feel addicted to. "I was looking for you," Arthur told her in his accented voice. His skill with Andai was improving. He had asked her to give him lessons after hearing her and Oberyn practicing with Maria, and it was a good distraction from her worry over Rhaenys, and now Aegon too, since he was no longer within her line of sight, so she had agreed. She tried not to dwell on just how much she was enjoying the time she was spending with him. It was shameful of her, really. Her husband had only been dead a few months, and yet here she was, already turning her eyes to another man. Yet Roriger had never really acted as a husband to her. Oh, he had done his conjugal duty but only until Egon's birth. After that, he had stopped visiting her bed, and she didn't bother trying to kid herself that it was due to his concern for her health if she were to become with child a third time. It had, and still did, hurt a great deal, the way that Roriger had taken another woman as a second wife. Elia might have been the one with the title of queen, she might have been assured that her son would be before Circeus, and Rhaenys before Valina in the succession, but that was all a cold comfort to the wounds his actions had left on her heart. She had loved him once, before he had shamed her, broken her heart and then lost himself in the library. Surely, in light of that, it was not a shameful thing for her to seek out another for comfort. She had never been unfaithful to Roriger when he lived, after all. She was a widow now, and her life was hers to do what she willed with. Oh, she tried to hide how pleased the fact that he had been seeking her out made her feel from her voice. "Might I help you with something, Paladin Dane?" "Arthur, I ask you call me Arthur," he murmured. She dared to hope that the look in his eye was one of tenderness. "Arthur," she repeated, smiling brightly at him. "But if I am to call you by your name, then you must call me by mine, yes?" He smiled back at her, his almost indigo eyes deepening to a shade nearly blue enough to be described as navy, something she liked due to the way that it further decreased his resemblance to her late husband. "Elia," he said. She felt her smile widen. "I have gained permission," he chose his words with clear care, evidently recalling their lessons. "To take you to visit the great library. Will you go with me?" "I would be delighted to come with you to see the great library," she agreed instantly and eagerly. In the south, women were not generally encouraged to read, though her homeland was far more liberal than the rest of the 6 kingdoms. But Elia had spent many days abed recovering from one illness or another as a child, unable to play with the other children or even attend lessons. And so, she had read book after book, losing herself in them to distract herself from the hours of loneliness when her brother or friends were unable to spend time with her. Learning of the great library, an entire keep maintained by certain scholars graduated from the university and their apprentices, had delighted her. It was the largest collection of books in the world, and the ultimate goal of the library was to obtain a copy of every book written. She had asked to see it, and been disappointed to learn that, due to fear of the books being damaged, permission from the chief librarian and an escort were required. Arthur had promised he would see about obtaining such for her. "Will we go now?" He extended an arm with a pleased expression. She took it willingly, happy to follow him everywhere and anywhere so long as he continued to look at her like that. "You said that the scholars have a sort of motto," she recalled as he began guiding her in the opposite direction of her chambers. "What is it again?" "In your language," he replied. "I believe that it would be the only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing." Elia blinked. "Who said that?" she asked, expecting to hear about yet another famous Stark. The rulers of the Winterlands definitely had great reason to be proud of their heritage, at any rate. She was surprised, therefore, when he answered, "Scholar Myron Darmandaeli, the first chief scholar of the university." A woman as not only the head of such an important organization, but the first head. Elia could only dream of such freedom. Even in Dawn, the Andal expectation of a woman's submission to the men of her life was strong. She wondered what her life would have been like, raised in a culture like the Winterlands where spouses could obtain a dissolution of their marriage, a cold-carrot divorce, if their spouse hit them or had an affair, whether it was a wife having an affair or harming her spouse. Same-sex couples could wed here too, or even the other way around, with a man raising a hand to his wife. Women and children were not considered property of their fathers or husbands in this place. And to cap it off, custody of any children and financial compensation were awarded to the victim in such scenarios. Queen Ashura had stunned all of their group silent when she had claimed that the South's laws made marriage akin to slavery. The worst part was that she was right, and when she pointed out the similarities, they all realized it. It made Elia's heart ache to picture what her life might have been like, had she not been bound by the laws of the South. She could have left Roriger after he shamed her, left him and raised her children in Dawn, away from Circe's poison, her husband's indifference and the cruelty of the capital. She could have met another man and been loved and respected, instead of humiliated and pitied. Glancing at Arthur out of the corner of her eye, Elia wondered if there was still a chance for her to have a loving relationship, or if she was a dreamy fool. She prayed for the former, and the slight smile that played on his lips whenever he looked at her gave her hope for it too. Chapter 16. The Unfortunate Luck of the Old Lion. The Red Keep, the 15th of April, 303 AC. Tywine. Casterly Rock. The Westerlands. The 10th of April, 303 AC. To his lordship Tywine Lannister, Lord Paramount of the Westerlands, Warden of the West, Head of House Lannister, Hand of the King, Lord Regent and Protector of the Realm for his Grace King Ena, first of his name and King of the Seven Kingdoms. Greetings and salutations, my lord and cousin. I pray that you are in a better situation than we are down here at the Rock. Dark winds bring dark news, as you well know. The fears that you warned us of in your letter have come true. It seems that Aegon has indeed made an alliance with the Winterlands. The Northwestern Fleet, under the command of whom I suspect to be the Starstarks from what I could see of the flags that the ships were flying, attacked Lannisport several nights ago, under the cover of darkness. It was a brutal assault, my lord. It cannot be called a battle in reality, only a massacre. Our garrison was taken by surprise, and was already severely undermanned due to so many men and boys having been called up as levies for the army. They ransacked the town. Oddly enough, no non-combatant was harmed by the barbarians, but they managed to destroy many of the buildings, and the defenders were all slaughtered, nearly to a man. Those who survived, by the skin of their teeth, are badly injured and I cannot say whether they will survive. The town maester has little hope for them, especially as the army took most of his supplies with them when they left. The Lannister fleet, of course, has already sailed for King's Landing. As you know, this means neither the town nor our home neither had, nor do we have now, any naval defenses, and we remain vulnerable to another attack by sea. We have been forced to barricade ourselves in the keep along with some others such as the local maester, a few survivors of the attack, and some others, and we are now under siege. The barbarians have surrounded us both on land and at sea, so we are incapable of either escaping or gaining assistance. I must be frank with you, my lord. We were completely unprepared for this situation. I cannot say how long we will be able to hold out against them. We do not have sufficient supplies or men to do so. The only good news that I can give you is that the army had already marched under the command of Sir Davin when the attack came. They should be well on their way by now, as Sir Davin stated to me that it was his intention to march double time with the men, in order to reach you as quickly as he could. That was several days past, the morning before the Northrons attacked, meaning they escaped the slaughter. He will be collecting more levies from the villages and keeps that he passes on the way to you. Please send aid and forward / or advice on what to do as soon as you can. May the Seven shield and guide you. Sir Damian Lannister, Castellan of Casterly Rock. Damn it! Tywine bellowed, flinging the letter at the wall and cursing. This was the confirmation he had been seeking since the council meeting back in March, when Varys had first hinted at the possibility of the alliance. King Aegon and his group had indeed found refuge in the north, and even worse, the north was helping them. It was hard to believe, but Tywine could see a few ways for it to have come about. If Aegon had forsworn his claims to the Weirwood throne and had managed to negotiate a decent enough deal with the Northern king, then maybe. Perhaps he had offered his unborn heir for the young Princess Serena, or something similar. A future daughter for Prince Brandon, mayhaps. There were many possible agreements that could have been made, in theory at the least. The details of how were not what really mattered, however. The results of the agreement were the problem. What was he going to do? The situation was a grim one indeed for his house. Tywine had a mad boy king on the Iron Throne, his control was reliant on almost entirely on the hostages from the various houses that he had, and with Ena's insanity, there was a large chance that he might start losing those hostages soon enough. His idiot of a daughter was trying to make decisions she could not possibly understand with her short-sightedness, and the Winterlanders were invading again. Tywine shuddered. The Winterlands were a horror to fight. For all their heresy and barbaric ways, he would acknowledge that they had their own strict code of honor. They never, ever, harmed an innocent. Unless you had a weapon in hand during a battle, they would leave you be. When they occupied a town, they never stole from the residents or hurt them. Tywine had in fact seen and heard stories from his men of them hang their own soldiers if they dared to break those rules. But the Winterlanders were brutal and merciless towards their enemies. And those beasts that they had. They said that the Winterlanders had magic still, that they were able to control animals with their minds, and Tywine believed it. You could train an animal to act in concert with you, but only so much. The bonds between those barbarians and their beasts were terrible and unnatural. They supposedly had giants as well, but Tywine had never seen one. He prayed that he would not in the future, either. How was he going to do this? The chances of holding the throne had always been slim, but now it was as good as lost. Even worse, his legacy, his life's work and the thing that mattered the most to him, would be tarnished. And all because of his idiot daughter's impetuousness and arrogance. He had actually started to hate Cersei more than his dwarf son. He snarled again and hit the wall, consumed by rage. If only Joanna had lived, he thought bitterly to himself. If only she had survived, and been able to have guided Cersei into becoming a proper lady, made her understand that it was her duty to increase Lannister power by mixing their bloodline with that of the Targaryens, not by ruling in her own right. In order to maintain power, two things were really needed: the Lord-inspired fear, to keep those below them in line, whilst the lady was responsible for inspiring loyalty through being kind and gracious. Joanna had been superb at that task. Jenna, who had taken over after her death, was good but not exceptional at it. His rule had been more stable, his twin children more sensible, when Joanna was still alive to keep everything running smoothly. But then the blasted imp had killed his lovely wife as he was being born, and then Cersei had come to the utterly idiotic conclusion that she was as capable as a man, and that she was meant to be his rightful heir. Never mind that she couldn't even sort through simple equations of cause and effect, and thought herself invincible because of her houses. It was not her gender that made Tywine so sure his daughter was not suited to being a ruler in her own right, but rather her obvious stupidity. She had no understanding of the truth of power. Tywine knew power, and he also knew that there were limits even to what he could do. If he went too far, the small folk would rise against his house, and they would be severely outnumbered. Quantity almost always beat quality, after all. There was a knock at the door, making him scowl even harder for a moment before he forced himself to hide his rage and, after picking up the letter and taking his place behind his desk, called out a curt enter. A moment later, the door opened to reveal Varys. Tywine felt his already tense jaw lock tighter. He didn't trust the spider. Varys worked for the realm. Whomever he believed best to keep the kingdoms safe, Varys would be loyal to. That fact, by default, meant that he was not loyal to Tywine's grandson, because Ina was a fool and a sadistic madboy, and very much not what was best for the kingdoms. Tywine was loath to sully his hands with his own blood, otherwise he'd have killed the imp years ago, though the dwarf was the only one of his children who had any sense of politics. Tywine loved Jaime and was proud of him, but he had quickly realized that his eldest son was a warrior, not a politician. That could have been dealt with, though, if only his son and heir had not decided to enter the damned Kingsguard of all things. But despite that, Tywine still had far too grim memories of Aerys' reign to willingly allow another Mad King to remain on the Iron Throne. As soon as he was able to make the necessary arrangements, Ina would die mysteriously or suddenly, or perhaps he could pin the blame for the assassination on Aegon. Accusations of kinslaying might turn things in his favor. Then Alex would be put on the throne as Ina's heir, and things would be far better. Alex was young enough to be moldable still, and unlike his elder brother had never shown any signs of insanity. He was a soft boy, but he could be fixed. Tywine would simply have to make sure to keep Cersei's influence away from him. "Ah, Lord Tywine," Varys simpered in greeting, bowing. "Please do forgive my intrusion. I am sure that you are occupied with the current situation in the West, however I have some news for you." "And what news is that, Lord Varys?" Tywine replied curtly, glaring impatiently at the eunuch. He was unsurprised that Varys had already learned of the attack on Lannisport and that his ancestral home was under siege by the Winterlanders, yet it still bothered him. Whom amongst his house's retainers was a little bird, as the Master of Whispers called them? And, just as importantly, what other things were they telling the man? Well, it seems that King Aegon, the usurper. Tywine interrupted the spymaster immediately. Of course, everybody knew that, by all the laws of gods and men, Egon was the rightful and legitimate ruler of Westeros. But Tywine was stuck on his path, and he had to act as though it was Ina who was the true king, and his elder half-brother the would-be despot. My apologies, Varys replied silkily. The usurper, Aegon Targaryen, has been spotted by my birds in the Eyrie, Sunspear, and Highgarden, speaking to the lords of those castles, over the course of the past moon, along with his uncle, Sir Oswyl, Prince Oberyn's eldest daughter and several others. He recently left the Reach, and is apparently returning to rejoin his army. Meanwhile, the Lords Arryn have marched from the Vale with their own troops. They left the Eyrie in the control of Princess Rhaenys, who had the Bloody Gate sealed again as soon as her lord husband and good father left. The Dornish army is also on the move, seemingly under the command of Lord Euronwood, and it is likely that the Reach will leave as soon as they have finished their arrangements also. How soon that will be, I regret to say I am uncertain at the moment. How could he possibly have been able to get to each of those kingdoms in such a short amount of time? Tywine demanded furiously. And why did you not hear and alert me of it before now? Varys' expression maintained its subservient expression, but Tywine could sense the mockery behind his impenetrable gaze. The spider had no doubt kept the information back for as long as possible, allowing him to play both sides by discreetly aiding Aegon through giving incomplete or late information and yet still doing enough to allow him to be able to claim that he was loyal to Ina, in the unlikely scenario that they were able to hold the throne. If only Tywine could replace him, but he was not a fool, unlike his children. There was nobody else in Westeros capable of doing what Varys could. Certainly nobody who would be loyal to his house. Even with divided loyalties, Tywine still desperately needed the spider's help, otherwise the cause was hopeless. In truth, Tywine already knew that the cause was hopeless. But he was still grimly determined to fight to the bitter end for the sake of preserving his legacy. He would not let everything he had worked for be destroyed by his children's idiocy. He would not. Unfortunately, my Lord Hand, things are not well in Westeros at this time, Varys said with false, or perhaps this particular emotion was not faked, sorrow. And my little birds are struggling to get their messages to me without the ravens being shot down. I received the letters only a little while ago, and came straight to inform you. Tywine suppressed a scoff of contemptuous disbelief at that outright lie, as Varys continued spinning his silken web. As for how King Aegon, apologies again, the usurper, is managing to travel so quickly, he is flying. He's hatched a dragon. Tywine demanded in panic, leaping to idiotic conclusions due to his tiredness and worry. Varys' eyes flashed with amusement as he shook his head whilst speaking to him in a soothing tone. No, no, your lordship, not so he could. The Winterlanders are flying him and his companions around the continent on a few of their griffins. King Aegon has no dragons to my knowledge. I see, Tywine replied curtly, trying to regain his dignity after the foolish outburst. Is there anything else? Varys shook his head silently, and Tywine sniffed again. Very well, he said briskly. You may go. The spider left with another bow, leaving Tywine to grimly contemplate the state of things. For the first time in his life, he was at a loss as to how he could proceed, for every possibility he looked at seemed to end with the worst-case scenario. His house, his sacred legacy, destroyed and in ruins. All because of Cersei's foolishness. He snarled and threw his goblet at the wall, where it fell to the ground, the wine spilling out over the floor. The red liquid looked disturbingly like blood. Underscore 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 underscore. The Riverwall Garrison, the 24th of May, 303 AC. Captain Kira Whitewolf. Kira Whitewolf knew that she was not a particularly important person in the grand scheme of things. She was only distantly related to Lord Torrhen, her head of house. He was her third cousin twice removed, or something similar enough to that. But despite the distant relationship, he had still taken her in when she was orphaned during a shivers epidemic at the age of 5 namadays, probably saving her life a dozen times over with that one kind act. Because of his sponsorship, she had been sent to foster as a part of the wolf pack at Winterfell, though she had not been a part of the Princess Inner Circle, as Kira was some years her elder. They got along well though, and Kira had faith and trust in the princess, despite some of her questionable decisions. Later on, after her fosterage had completed, Kira had been able to join the fighting flock, where she had climbed her way to the coveted rank of captain by the age of 26. She had no recollection of the last war with the Burners, but she had been raised right. She knew that the Andals were not to be trusted, that they had sought thousands of times to eliminate the gods of the forest, river and stone and to steal the Weirwood throne from the Starks. Yet not only had the royal family to whom she was sworn to serve decided to aid the crownless dragon of all people, but the Green Seers themselves had supported the decision. It seemed like madness to her, though Kira could acknowledge that there was no doubt a great deal going on behind the scenes that a lowly scouting archer such as herself would not be told of. It was still hard to wrap her mind around the thought of Burners being allies instead of enemies, yet she knew that her place was to obey and carry out the wills of her lieges and the gods, not to question them. That didn't mean she would let her guard down, though. For all they knew, the Southrons were pre-forming some elaborate trick, and just waiting for their chance to kill the Starks and steal the Weirwood throne. Though if they believed that the Northrons would simply kneel and